The House will come to order. Prayer by the chaplain.
Let us pray. Almighty God, we pause in this moment to seek your wisdom and guidance. Increase our ability to listen to one another, that we may truly hear and understand each other. Give us a spirit of generosity to one another, that we may show each other care and respect even as we disagree or stumble with our words. Let each step forward with renewed energy this week as this body gathers to resolve the issues before them for the sake of our wider community. May your wisdom guide us this day and always. And today as we gather, we pause to remember the father of Patrick Murphy, Richard Murphy, who passed away recently. We hold him and his family in our thoughts and prayers today. Amen.
Members, our house chaplain for today is our very own house chaplain, Reverend Grady St. Dennis. Will you please remain standing and recite the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. The clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. A quorum is present. Clerk will read the journal for the preceding day.
Journal of the House, 87th Session, 2012, 115th day, St. Paul, Minnesota, Thursday, May 3rd, 2012.
If there are no objections, further reading of the journal will be dispensed with, and the journal will stand as corrected by the Chief Clerk. Hearing no objections, the journal stands as corrected by the Chief Clerk. Conference Committee report on House files.
Conference Committee report. This is the Gunther motion. Conference Committee report on House File 1721, an act relating to economic development. The report's addressed to the Honorable Kurt Zeller, Speaker of the House, the Honorable Michelle L. Fishbach, President of the Senate. We, the undersigned conferees for House File 1721, report that we've agreed upon the items in dispute and recommend as follows. The report is signed by all two of the three conferees on the part of the House and all three conferees on the part of the Senate. Gunther moves that the report of the Conference Committee on House File 1721 be adopted and that the bill be repassed as amended by conference.
Members, if you could please, we're going to have a number of items of business before us today. I could barely hear the chief clerk standing in front of me. If you could please take your conversations to the alcove, or better yet, to the retiring room, so that we can hear Representative Gunther present his conference committee report. It would be much appreciated. Calling the member from Martin, Representative Gunther, to present your conference committee report.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this conference committee report came back the same way it was sent to the Senate.
Representative Gunther, 1 minute, please. Members, if you could please take your conversations to the alcove, or better yet, the retiring room, so Representative Gunther can present his conference committee report and the members who are listening are able to hear. Member from Martin, Representative Gunther, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill, like I said, came back the same way as it left, and I would appreciate your support. It has not only the redevelopment demolition loan bill, but it also has an ombudsman provision put on it for small businesses through deed. It doesn't cost any money. Deed has a person that can do that. And also Albert Lea has excess sewage capacity because of the fact that a packing plant closed, and they want to be able to market that in a positive way for economic development. Other than that, we have a couple words changed for land trusts, and like I said, it came back the same way it would. I appreciate your support.
Discussion to the conference committee report. The member from Ramsey, Representative Mahoney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, I did not get my signature on the conference committee report only because I was not available to sign it, not because I opposed the bill. But if the author of the bill would yield for a couple of questions.
He will yield. Representative Mahoney.
Representative Gunther, I've served on the Jobs Committee with you for almost 14 years now. So we both know what's in these bills. We both know the answer. Could you tell me and tell the members of the body how many jobs are created with this particular bill?
The member from Martin, Representative Gunther.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Mahoney, to my knowledge, there are no jobs supported by this bill. However, by redeveloping certain parcels of land, we could create a way that we could start new businesses. That is the purpose of the redevelopment loan program.
Member from Ramsey, Representative Mahoney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If the author will continue to yield.
He will yield. Representative Mahoney.
Representative Gunther, I was in the committee when the bill was heard, the baseline bill, the demolition loan program. And for those who don't know, we have an awful lot of land that in the city, in the county, in greater Minnesota, that actually has been damaged by old line industries. And we spend, counties, cities, localities spend a lot of money trying to clean it up. And for many years, the state has been trying to help. So, Representative Gunther, what's your sense of how much we should be funding this forgivable loan to reclaim damaged land rather than take farmland and farmland out of production so that we can put a company on that one, on farmland?
The member from Martin, Representative Gunther.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Based on a project we had in St. Paul called the Phelan Corridor. We spent a lot of money. It's a 9-year project and got national recognition, produced a lot of jobs, revitalized the whole neighborhood. I think we don't have nearly enough money for that. However, everything helps, and this is a start. And this expands the amount of money we had. So hopefully this will be a start of building that amount of money to help us do another Phelan.
The member from Ramsey, Representative Mahoney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'm glad you mentioned the Phelan Corridor. I'm done questioning you, Representative Gunther. I want to make a little speech. I know there are going to be a lot of them today. So I'm glad I get to be up early. The Phelan Corridor project that the state partnered with private business, the city, the county, now is home to over 6,000. That's a 6 with 3 zeros behind it, jobs, 6,000 jobs. And that project was completed, was started and completed when we invested through the Jobs Committee in the state of Minnesota. The chair previous to Representative Gunther, the chair, Representative Gunther, has had no money to do that. No money to invest in Deep River Falls or Martin County or Lac La Power County or the city of St. Paul or the city of Minneapolis. Members, if we want to grow these jobs in this state, we have to fund the Jobs Committee, and we are not doing it. This is a sad attempt when all we can do is policy. Members, the policy is good. I'm going to vote for it. I would have signed the report. But we all have to start to understand we don't create jobs, but we create the climate that they can be done in. We help small businesses as a state, and we are not doing it.
Discussion. The member from Hennepin, Representative Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to kind of back up what my colleague, Representative Mahoney, was saying, and also to thank Representative Gunther for his leadership with almost no money to spend. I want to thank you for the valiant attempts you made to try to bring dollars to the Jobs Committee. And one of the areas, of course, that I've watched out continually for is the housing area, but also the job creation area. And I know that you had some very good ideas, and they cost some money, so they're not in here. I appreciate what you did do, and I just wanted to say that publicly. And thank you for the tweaking of the language we needed for the land trust. That was important. But I hope, Mr. Speaker, members, that in the future, whoever's in charge, we can really act like creating jobs and creating housing is really an important part of this committee's mandate, and that we provide them with the funding they need. So I thank you, and I'm also sad that there's not more dollars attached to this. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Hey, members, if you could please take your conversations to the alcove, or better yet, the retiring room, so that the members can be heard on the floor. Member from Hennepin, Representative Lincheski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Representative Gunther, yield.
He will yield. Representative Lincheski.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Gunther, I'm just trying to read your language here now, and I'm particularly interested in this conference committee report on the loan program you're setting up here for economic development authorities. And Representative Gunther, you know, it puzzles me why this is here with no funding, but a bigger concern I have is, you know, the way we've done this in the past is we provide the loan to the business, and you're going to provide it to the government. So I'm trying to understand, you know, are there cities out there who, by the way, members, have lots of tools to do this already? They have tax increment financing, they have their local resources, they can apply for state grants, and now in this bill, instead of giving these loans to businesses, we're going to give it straight up to the city council. Can you explain to me what cities are coming forward asking for this?
The member from Martin, Representative Gunther.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Lencheski, this was a bill brought to me by the department. I'm sure they have a list of cities. I can't recall what they were. However, this is a bill that, if it's approved, they will get the money 2 years from now. It's not immediately given to them. And if the project goes forth, they will get half of the loan forgiven, and they will have to pay back the other half. So they have the money coming in, and they assure me that it will be there.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Lencheski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will Representative Gunther continue to yield?
He will yield. Representative Lencheski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Gunther, you know, that doesn't give me any sense of calmness about this provision, and I'm sure I'm in the minority here. I'm sure your conference committee report is going to pass overwhelmingly. But members, I think you should know on the record here that, you know, people like me actually are not a big fan of DEED handing out money in the first place through business subsidies to businesses. But now we're going to have the state hand out money to the city councils via their economic development authorities and port authorities and other entities to give out money to businesses. And Representative Gunther, if you could tell me where I'm wrong, the way I read your language is there is no requirement that the cities must repay this state money if nothing works. They might. It'd be nice, but I don't see that they have to.
Calling the member from Martin, Representative Gunther.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There is a requirement to pay back at least 50%. There is a forgiveness portion if they do the project. There is a portion in there if they don't do the project within 3 years, they have to pay the full loan back completely. And the money comes out of the general fund through deed.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Lencheski.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know folks have a busy day ahead here, so I won't continue to ask questions. My guess is it's going to pass, no problem. But I do want to put on the record, Mr. Speaker and Representative Gunther, I oppose this. I wish members would think about this. I know you're distracted by other things today. I wish you would oppose it. Members, this is a new loan mechanism from the state of Minnesota. It's not funded, so it feels like, well, we're not really using state money yet. But, you know, we're setting it up to have future state funding where we're going to take money from the state general fund and give it to local units of government to, quite frankly, play in the market, which they shouldn't be doing. Let's, again, Mr. Speaker, let's let the capitalists be capitalists. This is not a road we should be going down. This is just another way for the state to take taxpayers' money and pick winners and losers in the market. Again, I know it will pass here now, Mr. Speaker, but I'll be voting no.
Discussion. The member from Hennepin, Representative Mullery.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I have to disagree with my colleague. There are reasons for this. I'm glad to see Representative Gunther has it in, although I wish you would be a little more eloquent in getting your fellow members on that side of the aisle to put up a little money for backing a project that would be good. However, this is needed by a lot of, in fact, it's a lot of cities around the state to combat the continuing use of green space and farmlands instead of the old polluted inner city brownfields. And in order to revitalize our cities all across the state, this is really needed in order to stop the crawl.
Discussion. There being no further discussion, all those in favor of the motion to adopt the Conference Committee report on House File 1721 signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. The motion prevails. The clerk will give the bill its third reading as amended by conference.
Third reading, House File 1721 is amended by conference.
Third reading. Discussion. Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. There being 111 ayes and 17 nays, the bill is repassed as amended by conference. Its title is agreed to. Conference Committee report on a House file.
Conference Committee report. This is the Beard motion. Conference Committee report on House File 2685, an act relating to transportation. The report's addressed to the Honorable Kurt Zeller, Speaker of the House, the Honorable Michelle L. Fischbach, President of the Senate. We, the undersigned conferees for House File 2685, report that we've agreed upon the items in dispute and recommend as follows. The report is signed by 2 of the 3 conferees on the part of the House and all 3 conferees on the part of the Senate. Beard moves that the report of the Conference Committee on House File 2685 be adopted and that the bill be repassed as amended by conference.
Call the member from Scott, Representative Beard, who will explain the Conference Committee report.
Mr. Speaker, members, thank you. Members, this is the 2 transportation policy bills, the one we started last year, the one we did this year, that moved out of this body about a month ago. In Conference Committee on Saturday, Mr. Speaker and members, we combined last year's bill, House File 1284, with elements of this year's bill, House File 2685, with the concurrence and advice of the Senate and with the governor's folks having lots of input into the committee. The members actually, all 6 members have signed or will be signing the Conference Committee report. On the House side, Representative Benson could not make it on Saturday. He had, I think, a graduation ceremony in Rochester. He will be signing the Conference Committee report shortly. Representative Nelson ably represented our DFL colleagues, and he and I did sign off on the Conference Committee report. Mr. Speaker, members, I'd like to thank the nonpartisan staff, Matt Burris, Melissa Johnson, who kept us on track and in the short weeds, I guess we could say. Last year, of course, we had the pleasure of being served by Ms. Corinne Zewers, who moved over to MnDOT. She's a MnDOT employee at this time. Melissa Johnson has quite ably stepped in. My committee administrator, Mark Nisley, the committee legislative assistant, Anna Barr, our DFL lead, Representative Frank Hornstein. Representative Hornstein, thank you for your input and your service to the people of Minnesota and to this committee, and to every one of the members who served on the committee. I want to say thank you. Over the last 2 years, we've done some, I think, useful work that's actually made mobility increase in this state. The Conference Committee report, rather than tell you everything that's in it, I'm happy to yield to questions for that. But members, let me just tell you perhaps how it changed from when the 2 bills left the floor and were put together. Primarily, we had a couple of provisions Representative Abler needed some help on. They came out, members, sometimes by bringing your bill forward to a committee and having an honest discussion with the agencies, useful things happen without actually having to pass a statute. Good work was done in Representative Abler's district just because we had a good chat with our friends at MnDOT. I had a contingency appropriation mechanism in the bill. As you'll know, Senator Gimsey and I actually went to court last summer during the temporary shutdown to ask the judge to find the constitutionally dedicated funds important enough to continue the construction projects were already let. We called it the Let the Dirt Fly bill. The governor vehemently opposed this provision and encouraged us to find a test case so that the courts could settle it. Of course, we disagree with that technique. We think we should address it legislatively. However, members, in the interest of having a peace in the valley and the bill getting passed, having a smooth road here for passage, we yielded on that position. Representative Champion and Detmer both worked extensively and carefully on the targeted group preference and the veterans bid preference. That bill has already been signed into law, so we dropped those provisions out. We had an issue with municipal aid for the St. Croix Bridge with Representative Lomer. We did, again, this is an example of a bill that didn't need to pass but needed to have an open discussion. We received assurances from MnDOT that there is a mechanism for helping Oak Park Heights as the new Stillwater Bridge is being built over the next several years, and we will do that through capital bonding at some point here in the future, including this year. Representative Benson had a U.S. DOT number provision to exempt farm trucks from having to have DOT numbers. The Senate would not accept that provision, and so we dropped that out. Representative Hoppe had withdrew a provision regarding drug testing for small bus drivers. There's some mischief came afoot after we heard the bill and determined that that would not make good public policy at that time. That provision needs further vetting and a couple more committees, so we withdrew that. Representative Biskins had a prohibition against DVS, spending money on MNLARs until they actually have a contract. Members, that's no longer necessary. I'm happy to announce DVS has signed a contract for the MNLARs process. Representative Scalzi had a provision that I enthusiastically agreed with to reopen the opt-out communities. The governor and the Metropolitan Council opposed that, and so in the interest of a smooth path to signage, we dropped that provision. And there was a small piece about non-commercial aviation being added to privately owned airports. So the governor signed that in the Fish and Game bill, so we yielded on that position. With that, the bills otherwise were pretty much the same as when they left the House. Mr. Speaker, if there are questions, I'd be happy to stand for questions. Otherwise, you can vote with confidence. You can support the conference committee report and adopt it.
The member from Scott, Representative Biskins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members, and thank you for that explanation, Representative Beard. I was going to ask about the MNLARS provision, but you explained it quite well. They have finally, members, signed a contract. We have provided this agency with the ability to spend up to $90 million to create a technology infrastructure that was created in Iowa for right around $30 million. The agency has spent over $10 million of the money we've given them already, and until just recently had not signed a single contract. Representative Beard, Representative Hornstein, and any other member of this legislature who is coming back and will serve on the Committee of Transportation, I beg you to watch these dollars and watch this agency. You have a fiduciary responsibility to the taxpayers of this state. There's shenanigans going on with this money, and it's up to you, who will be here again next year, to keep your eye on the ball on this and make sure that taxpayer dollars are indeed well spent. Thank you, Representative Beard.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Nelson. The member from Hennepin, Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, as Representative Beard said, I served on the conference committee. This is, as he said, this is a combination of the Transportation 1 and Transportation Policy 2 that we passed earlier. Most of the non-controversial provisions that are in there, and most of the bad stuff that I would consider bad stuff, got taken out. And I did sign the conference committee report, and hopefully we can get this signed by the governor.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Mullery.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Beard yield?
He will yield. Representative Mullery.
Representative Beard, are the TGB and DBE languages in there exactly as the department requested?
The member from Scott, Representative Beard.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Mullery, no. They actually passed in a separate bill exactly as the agencies wanted them to be. So we went ahead and took them out of this bill and left them stand in a separate bill that's already been signed into law.
Member from Hennepin, Representative Mullery.
Thank you, Representative Beard.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Hornstein.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members, and I would like to also thank Representative Beard and the members of the conference committee who worked hard on this over the weekend. This was really a good example, members, of the majority, the minority, the governor's office, the agencies working together to craft a product that, while not perfect, and everyone will find one fault or another with something in the bill, overall it's a good bill. It moves transportation forward, and I would encourage a yes vote, a good bipartisan yes vote on this transportation policy bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Discussion. The member from Olmsted, Representative Norton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members and Representative Beard, thank you very much for this relatively non-controversial and good bill. I specifically want to speak to the safe routes to school language. I know it wasn't in our bill, it was in the Senate's version. I really appreciate you taking that particular provision. It was one of the recommendations, in fact, the only major recommendation this year from the Childhood Obesity Task Force. And so on behalf of that task force, and I think Representative Detmer would concur, we really appreciate you taking that provision, and I think it's a good bill. Thank you.
Discussion. The member from Blue Earth, Representative Breinert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I just wanted to thank the conference committee for paying attention and including a provision that really benefits my community directly, but all of South Central and Southwest Minnesota indirectly, and that's the Open Door Health Clinic, who just recently invested in a mobile dental unit. And because of the exact language in statute, they were not able to avail themselves of the sales tax exemption prerogative that's currently there for most medical units. And that small provision is in this bill. It has tremendous value to a service being provided for the whole South Central and Southwest area of Minnesota, so I appreciate that effort.
The member from Meeker, Representative Erdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Just want to thank the conferees for putting together what I think is a good bill. There's a little provision in there that shows that after 7 years of work, the Senate and the House and the governor and public safety and MnDOT can get together and agree on something.
Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the motion to adopt Conference Committee report on House File 2685 signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. The motion prevails. The clerk will give the bill its third reading as amended by conference.
Third reading, House File 2685 as amended by conference.
Third reading. Discussion. Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. Clerk will close the roll. There being 128 ayes and 2 nays, the bill is repassed as amended by conference. The title is agreed to. Fiscal calendar. The first bill on the fiscal calendar for today is House File 1752. The Chief Clerk will report the bill.
House File 1752 on the fiscal calendar for today, the first engrossment, an act relating to capital improvements.
Call the member from Cass, Representative Howes, to present your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before I proceed, I have to do a few thank yous to Tom Freeman, the committee administrator, Deb Dyson, legislative analyst, Melissa Johnson, fiscal staff, Larissa Fisher, GOP research, and Nancy Conley, DFL research, and Representative Hausman, DFL lead. And I would also like to thank the Majority Leader, Matt Dean, for his work last night, and the Minority Leader, Paul Thiessen, for his phone calls yesterday. With that, Mr. Speaker, has the delete all amendment been introduced?
It has not.
Could we do that now, Mr. Speaker?
The member from Dakota, Representative Holberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members, and I'd like to move to suspend Rule 4.05. The bonding bill, that's the base bill, is smaller in size than the delete all amendment. So to adopt the delete all amendment would violate the spending limit rule 4.05, and so we need to suspend that rule in order to expedite this bill on the floor today. If we would not do that, we'd basically have to take the bill back to Ways and Means, repass it there, and we just don't have time to do that. I've talked to the Minority Leader. He is in support of this and has assured me that there will not be amendments to increase the size of the bonding bill beyond the size in the delete all amendment.
Call the member from Hennepin, Representative Thiessen, to the Holberg motion.
Thank you. I support the motion and agree with what Representative Holberg just said about the understanding.
Discussion. The member from Scott, Representative Biskins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I would oppose this motion, and I would oppose this motion based on a couple of things. But number one, because of the amount of time that the legislature required of itself to actually read a bill. Now, members, this bill has changed dramatically. Not just the tens of millions in spending increases in the bill, but in the provisions in the spending. And I'm not talking just about the spreadsheet provisions, but I'm talking about the components within. Members, if we take up this bill right now, if we vote on this bill right now, 80 pages of provisions that we don't even know what they say yet, then we're no better than the U.S. Congress that says we've got to pass a bill before we can know what's in the bill. Absolutely ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous, members. Let's vote down this motion. Let's at least spend the 2 hours so we can examine the bill and the language within it. Let's make sure we know what we're voting on. We owe it to the people of the state of Minnesota. Mr. Speaker, I request a roll call.
Representative Biskins requests a roll call on the motion. There being 15 hands, there will be a roll call on the motion to suspension of the Rule 4.05. Discussion. Member from Dakota, Representative Wardlow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I urge a red vote on suspension of the rules. James Madison, one of my favorite founding fathers, said something to the effect of, in one of the Federalist Papers, there is no point to choosing one's representatives if the laws are too long to be read or too confusing to be understood. In this case, members, we have a very long bill that's coming at us with very short notice, and we will be passing upon it if we suspend the rules without having fairly and fully considered its contents, let alone giving the public an opportunity to do the same and provide input to we legislators. So I urge a red vote on suspension of the rules.
Discussion of the motion. The member from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Holberg yield to question?
She will. Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Holberg, if this motion does not pass, when would we be able to take up the bill that's before us right now?
The member from Dakota, Representative Holberg.
Well, Mr. Speaker and Representative Liebling, I'm not sure how long our floor debate will go today. We have the bonding bill, and then also the Viking Stadium bill, I understand, will be on the floor. So if it were possible to have a Ways and Means Committee hearing after session, the bill wouldn't be reported to the floor until tomorrow. That is, if we finished Ways and Means probably more than 5 hours before the floor session was scheduled for tomorrow. Then it'd have to get its second reading, so I believe Wednesday would be the earliest that the bill could be taken on the House floor.
The member from Washington, Representative Dean.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Members, I would support the motion to suspend rules to take up the bonding bill. It will allow us to take it up and hopefully pass it to so that we can move on to other work. We need to do that. Members, I would point out that this was posted last evening with the spreadsheet. We all received links to that. We all received the language last evening. It has been posted and has been available. So I would support the motion, support a green vote on suspension of the rules. Thank you.
Discussion. The member from Scott, Representative Biskins.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I don't know about the we all received language bit. I looked up this morning on the House website, and it was still the language as passed by the Committee on Ways and Means. There was no posting of any delete all amendments. This is the first. In fact, if you feel the packet, it's still warm. It just got off the copier. So members, we're at the 116th day today That means 4 more legislative days, and the legislature is only required to meet every 3rd day. Committees can meet in between that time. There is no urgency, members, to do the right thing. There is no urgency to pass this, excuse me. There's no urgency to pass this, but there is always urgency to do the right thing. Putting this language here before us, you know, there's $10 million in local road funding in this bill. I saw that on a spreadsheet I got last week. But I have no clue if the language earmarks that money to certain places and certain areas. And I'll bet most people here have no clue because we just got the language. And that's just one little bit. I'm talking just $10 million in a $490 million bill. Where's the money going? Let's do our job. Let's take the time. Let's read the bill. We don't have an urgency to pass this. We've got 4 more legislative days, 3 days in between. We've got at least 12 days. We can do the right thing.
Seeing no further discussion, a roll call being requested. The clerk will take the roll on the motion. Clerk will close the roll. Representative Mack votes aye. There being 102 ayes and 29 nays, the motion prevails. There is an author's amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the author's amendment.
House moving to amend House File 1752. The first engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded 1013.
Calling the author of the bill, Representative Howes, to explain your author's amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And before I move forward with it, I will have 2 oral amendments. I do one at a time.
Representative Howes, please state your oral modifications to your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On page 18, line 32, it states statute section 15B.155, delete the last 5.
Yep, got it.
Your next modification, Representative Howes.
Repeat that, Mr. Speaker. You want the second one also? All right. On page 57, delete section 52.
Chief Clerk will report the oral modifications to the author's delete all amendment.
Howes is modifying his amendment, coded 1013, as follows on page 18. Delete 15B.155 and insert 15B.15. And on line 57, or page 57, delete section 52.
Representative Howes, the delete all amendment is now in the shape in which the author wishes. Please present your author's amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I know you've had plenty of time to look at the spreadsheet. You've probably just got the delete all amendment. I will go through that briefly and then I will stand for questions. The University of Minnesota and Minskew, the governor had a problem that they were a little too far apart. That's why we didn't do it last week. We did bring them a little closer together. $64 million for the university and $132 for Minskew. Education got $1 million. State Academies $1 million. Perpich Center for the Arts $263,000. Natural Resources $46.5. Pollution Control Agency $2 million. Bowser $12 million. Agriculture $706,000. Rural Finance Authority $33 million. The Zoo $4 million. Administration $50,555,000. Amateur Sports $375,000. Military Affairs $23.5. Transportation $49.4. The Met Council $12.8. Human Services $5.6. Veterans Affairs $7.4. Corrections $9.1. Employment Economic Development $78.5. Public Facilities Authority $23.5. Housing Finance Agency $5.5. The Historical Society $32.250. And that's the extent of the expenditures. And rather than go through each one, I'll just stand for questions. You've got the spreadsheet, you've looked at that, so I'm ready for questions.
Discussion of the author's delete all amendment. Discussion. Seeing, I'm sorry, the member from Homestead, Representative Liebling.
I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker, we could adopt this and then I'll ask my question.
Discussion. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the author's delete all amendment signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. The motion prevails. The member from Homestead, Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and if Representative Howes would yield, please.
He will yield. Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Howes, one of the things that interests me a great deal in this bill is the fund of $50 million for economic business development through capital projects grant program. And you know, as you know, some of us are rather disappointed. Representative Howes, if you can hear me. Some of us are rather disappointed in this bill because we have local projects, in particular for me, the Rochester Mayo Civic Center is not in this bill. And something that's been on the agenda for years, has been given preliminary money in previous bills, has been actually passed and vetoed at least once, and is not in this bill once again. And there is this fund. And so my question to you is whether our Civic Center project, which I know you're quite familiar with, would be eligible for funding under this pool of $50 million.
Member from Cass, Representative Howes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Liebling, there will be projects throughout the state that, in all likelihood, could be eligible. There is criteria in here in that section. If you read that thoroughly, you'll see where that's at. And many things will fit in there, even wastewater, a community center, transportation issues might fit in there. So there are a lot of things that could fit in there. And we felt that this was a way that Greater Minnesota, who probably many times don't have lobbyists to come here and speak for them, have an opportunity through deed to apply, meet the criteria, and possibly get a project for their town or city.
The member from Homestead, Representative Liebling.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Howes, well, you really didn't answer my question, and I asked you quite specifically whether civic centers, whether our civic center, Rochester Mayo Civic Center, Convention Center really, is eligible under this, and I think by not answering it, I'm going to take your answer as a yes, that this is eligible, and I see you nodding your head there, and so thank you very much for that.
The member from Minoka, Representative Abler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the Representative Howes yield for a question?
He will yield. Representative Abler.
Thank you, Representative Howes. My question is on the same topic. On line page 37 of the bill, you talk about the criteria for this grant program. And you used the word roads in your description. As I read line 37.33 to 35, it talks about buildings. And I'm not sure that it says what you want it to say. I talked to you about a carp barrier at our local dam that you thought might be eligible for this because it would have an economic impact on the Mille Lacs watershed. But when you said roads, I don't see roads in there. It talks about a building. And it says funds granted under this program may be used for the following activities: pre-design, design, acquisition of land or buildings, construction, furnishing and equipping of a new or renovated building. And I think that if you meant roads or other public transportation projects, you might want to have a clarifying language. And I might suggest an oral amendment. It's something in the order of roads or other public works to make that clear. And maybe I'm willing to work on that while the amendments go on. But is that, can you tell me what you meant and what that, if that's really a problem?
Representative Howes will yield. The member from Cass, Representative Howes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Abler, maybe I misspoke, but when on line 24 where it says public infrastructure, means public infrastructure in this state included but not limited to. I would look at a road as infrastructure.
The member from Minoka, Representative Abler.
Well, I can take this offline, but I want to be sure we can fix it while we're on, before we get to third reading, because I think that there is some merit in getting rid of the earmark, escalating earmark races that people have, and having, good criteria. So I think this is a really positive step forward, but I want to make sure it's inclusive enough to do what you said. We're writing the bill on the floor today. There's a new section that's on page 37 in law that describes where this money is going to go. So I think that we have time to make it squared away. So I don't know who I even talked to about that. Can you give me some advice?
The member from Crow Wing, Representative Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will Representative Howes yield, please?
He will yield. Representative Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Howes, you and I have talked about in the past year about the Kuina Lake Trail extension, for which I put in a bonding request. And I see that the State Parks and Trails Renewal and Development has $4 million allocated. Could you please share with the body, Representative Howes, please, how that appropriation will work for different trails in the state?
The member from Cass, Representative Howes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Ward, the DNR would take their priority lists and use it in that fashion.
The member from Crow Wing, Representative Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Howes. So in other words, DNR needs to be contacted to let them know that the appropriation that within your district or where you think is a needed area in the state of Minnesota to get on their list, or is it already a list that they have set up? If you'll yield, please, Mr. Speaker.
The member from Cass, Representative Howes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know the DNR does have a list. I haven't seen it for a long time, so I couldn't tell you what's on that right now. I don't recall.
The member from Crow Wing, Representative Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And so, Representative Hausen, just finally, I've seen some lists throughout the process, both in our committee and our Capital Investment Committee, and then just specifically with the DNR. And so, Representative Howes, I just kind of want to hear your feeling about the Kuina Lakes Trail extension as far as an important part in the state of Minnesota as a trail that we need to look at for a part of this $4 million appropriation.
The member from Cass, Representative Howes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Ward, I thoroughly support the Cuyuna project, if that's what you're getting at, but I can't identify it in the bill and make you and I happy and no one else happy.
Discussion to the author's delete all amendment. The member from Hennepin, Representative Carlson.
Mr. Speaker, would Representative Howes yield to a couple of questions?
He will yield. Representative Carlson.
I've been following since you and I and others visited Twin Cities Public Television, and I see it's not in the bill. And the concern I'm raising, one of the things that we try to do is maximize private investment, and at that meeting that you and I were at, they indicated they had raised $9 million privately, and if I recall, it was for an $18 million project. So roughly 50% of it would be privately funded. And the question I have of you, what kind of a discussion did you have about that, and why is that $9 million being rejected, and how long will those pledges stand if we don't act on it this session? Is that $9 million that we will ultimately lose, or will we recapture it with a bonding bill next year? And then I have another question after we're done with that short series of questions.
Member from Cass, Representative Howes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Carlson, as you're aware, this has taken quite a while to put together. All four caucuses have had someone with input in putting this together. We had to make choices. Some of the choices were easy, some of the choices were very hard. With that one, it was extremely difficult, but there simply wasn't enough room to put it in the bill at this time.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Carlson.
Well, Mr. Speaker, members, on that point, and that kind of gets me to my next series of questions. There's the forecasted number, and I think when the bill left capital investment, the number that you had adjusted for the forecast provided for a $501 million bonding bill, if I recall, and you're at 496. So that would be, and you still have that number in here. So you've got $5 million of the approximately 9 that you would need right there, but you'd be capturing a good deal of it. So you're within, in my view, with that forecasted number, simply of $4 million of gaining that additional $9 million. If you could correct me if I'm wrong on that, Representative Howes, I would appreciate it.
The member from Cass, Representative Howes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Carlson, you may be correct, but our agreed upon total is 496. If I were to try to fit $9 million in here, I'm going to have to remove $9 million from somewhere, and I simply cannot do that with all the discussions we've had with leadership in all four caucuses.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Carlson.
Mr. Speaker, members, you would simply have to adjust that forecasted number by $4 million, not 9, because you already have in the forecasted number that you have there $501 million, and you're using 496. So you're within reach, and you would be capturing that additional $9 million is my point. Now, Representative Howes, I plan on supporting the bill here today, but I think that is one weak spot where we're not capturing as fully as we might private investment. And even if I recall from that meeting we were at, the for-profit TV stations, I think the owner of Channel 5 was cited as one of the strong supporters of providing that additional funding for Twin Cities Public Television, which I found interesting. They don't apparently view it as competition, but as something that helps enhance the quality of life by having a state-of-the-art facility there. So I would hope that obviously this has been pre-confereed, so I can't say, as this bill moves forward, I would hope that that adjustment would be made, but I think we can probably check. I would hope as chair of the committee you would check and see how long those pledges will stand into the future to see if that $9 million will be there when we come back next January. The other question or comment that I have that perhaps Representative Howes could comment on, when you're reducing the forecasting number that was originally at $750 million, and we're going to be debating later today the stadium bill, and that would have been roughly $250 million, depending on the outcome of various amendments that would come forward on the stadium bill, that would have already been available in the forecast, which would have probably got us to about half of what we needed, and that was in the original forecast number. I see Representative Lanning is busy talking with others, but that may be something that he wants to perk up on, because if this goes through, you're clamping down the forecast number. And depending on the amendments that go on the next bill, that could have an indirect impact. So perhaps Representative Lanning might yield to a question. Representative Lanning, did you hear what I was talking about with the forecast? This bill clamps down the forecast number by $250 million from where it was originally, and I was saying, depending on the outcome of various amendments to the Vikings bill that'll be coming up later, or really we should be calling it the stadium bill, not necessarily the Vikings per se, but that's the way it's perceived. Are you aware that this bill clamps down then on the funding that would be available under the forecast? Because it was originally at $750 million. You're using 496 with this bill that's before us, and that would have left on the table with the old forecast number that was in the bill $250 million as a result of the February forecast that could have been used, if necessary, to backfill any shortfalls with the Viking bill. And I don't know if you've tracked that at all or tracked that in this bill. Maybe you can just say yes or no. You don't view it as a problem. You view it as something that should be looked at. If you could comment.
The member from Clay will yield. Member from Clay, Representative Lanning.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Carlson, I'm aware of the fact that this bill doesn't go up to the spending level that's in the budget forecast. I'm aware of that. As far as I'm concerned, that should not have any impact whatsoever on the bill that we're going to be taking up later today, because I think we've already clearly determined that we do not have the option of using general obligation bonds to help fund this facility.
Mr. Speaker, Representative
The member from Hennepin, Representative Carlson.
That forecasted number has nothing to do with whether they're general obligation bonds or some other form of a bond. It would only deal with what the state obligation would be. And the gambling revenue in your bill, as we know, is somewhat speculative. We don't really know what the outcome is going to be. And when you bring this down to $501 million, you lose that option potentially, depending on amendments that would be coming about, or depending on what the income might be off of gaming as your bill currently stands. Now, I know there's going to be amendments that may change some of that, but that's my point, something you should be watching.
There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Rukavina and others moving to amend House File 1752, the first engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded 574.
Call on the member from the county of St. Louis, the Honorable Representative Rukavina, to explain your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was trying to drum up votes over there on your side of the aisle. I apologize. Members, what the amendment would do is ask that we jumpstart, I guess, for lack of a better word, a industry in the state of Minnesota where we have 4 different manufacturing plants making solar, either photovoltaic cells or thermal for solar. And it requires that, but it's not an actual mandate, members, because if you look on the back page, there is language in here that basically lets the commissioner, for a couple of different reasons, exempt the projects and the requirements of this amendment, and it's enough of an exemption that I think you can drive a Mack truck through it. But what it does, it's a made in Minnesota requirement. As you know, many of you, in current law, we have a made in Minnesota solar program through Excel that's extremely successful, and every year since we passed it, the money gets eaten up very quickly in whether they're tax rebates or other rebates from Excel that put solar panels on people's homes. And members, we have a great climate for solar, if some of you don't know that. This is similar to the language that has us putting in artwork when we do new construction. As I mentioned, it's a big leeway given to the commissioner. And members, what it does basically on huge projects, it requires no more than 40,000 kilowatts have to be put on the building of solar panels, and a quarter of that which is about at the maximum a $320,000 expense, and that 25% of that would be thermal, or could be. Members, we have solar panels being produced in Representative Ingebrigtsen's district, and I have a letter here signed by 4 senators in support of this. Senator Carlson in Representative Purcell and Howe's district has a plant. Senator Hall has a plant, I believe, in Representative Myra and Lincheski's House districts. And let's see, and of course I have one in my district, members. I think it's a really good amendment as we try to strive towards meeting our renewable energy mandates that Governor Palente put in law years ago. I think this is a great way to do it. You know, we had some of the strongest, and we still do it regarding the American flag, the strongest made in the USA language in the country. And until last session, when I had my knee surgery and I couldn't make it to the special session, and somehow Representative Hansen, my Made in USA amendment for state uniforms and state safety equipment disappeared from law. I think this is a good way to, when you're using the taxpayers' money to the tune of close to $500 million to help our local industries. So with that, Representative Howes, I would hope that you'd help me out on this. I know that you've supported this amendment in the past. My understanding is the governor supports the amendment, and with the number of Republican senators I pointed out here, I think that this will meet the muster over in the Senate. So thank you very much for your support. And Representative Franson, not to leave you out, but you also have a plant in your district, and I know you're going to support this. So with that, I'll sit down and maybe, Mr. Chair, hope that Representative Howes stands up in support of this, Mr. Speaker.
The member from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Rukavina yield for a question?
He will yield, Representative Hansen.
Representative Rukavina, we haven't done this one before. With the Made in Minnesota criteria, if a company is not one of the 4 right now, is it a competitive process? Can newer emerging businesses become certified Made in Minnesota so that they could compete for this type of thing?
The member from St. Louis, Representative Rukavina.
Well, Mr. Speaker, this is the first time I think we've shared a microphone even. If your brother-in-law's new plant needs to... No, I don't. I would assume that anybody that meets the requirements set out in current law, which I think are referenced in here in a few places, meets that requirement, they would certainly be eligible.
The member from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Rukavina. If this is a competitive process that allows for new folks to come in and we can get more Made in Minnesota solar, I think this is a great idea to encourage the market. So I'd encourage support of Representative Rukavina's amendment.
Member from Ramsey, Representative Mahoney.
Would the member from Representative Rukavina yield for a question?
Member from St. Louis will yield, Representative Mahoney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the member from St. Louis, my question to you is I read through your amendment, and it is pretty weighted towards solar photovoltaic. And just so you understand, solar thermal, you can do better heating, you can do better cooling. Is there a reason that you don't like solar thermal, or is it just an oversight on your part? And would you be willing for me to work on this before the vote to get an amendment onto this?
Member from St. Louis, Representative Rukavina.
Mr. Speaker, to answer your last question first, I think, you know, the horse is out of the barn, so to speak, Representative. But let me tell you this, I know that solar thermal is very important, but there isn't a mandate for thermal, although it could potentially save a lot of electricity, no doubt about that. But this was drafted with the support of those other plants that make the thermal involved. I think we have support from everybody involved here, including the governor's office, the manufacturers, both of thermal and photovoltaic. So I'm just trying to get enough votes to pass this, Representative Mahoney, and I certainly would think that a good, you know, union guy like you would want to help out the IBW too, and that you'd support this.
The member from Ramsey, Representative Mahoney.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Rukavina, if you're not burning natural gas and you're cooling your house, that leaves more natural gas for all the power plants that we burn natural gas to create electricity. And if you're not using electricity to cool your house, that should mean that you would hit the renewable energy standards. So, Mr. Speaker, Representative Rukavina, I'm going to support your amendment, but it'd be nice if you would start actually trying to include all the labor thugs in your amendments.
The member from Douglas, Representative Franson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Rukavina yield to a question?
He will yield, Representative Franson.
Thank you. Representative Rukavina, could you refresh the body here about Solyndra?
The member from St. Louis, Representative Rukavina.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Franson, I'd rather refresh the body's memory about British Petroleum, but you know, that's a whole other subject, I guess. You know, there are subsidies for petroleum, there are subsidies for natural gas, there are subsidies for everything. I don't see this as a subsidy. I see this as a cost savings for the taxpayers in both the solar thermal that Representative Mahoney referred to and the photovoltaic cells, which will be putting electricity back into the grid and saving those buildings over a very short period of time money on their electric bill or on their natural gas bill or whatever. So Solyndra is not my intentions here. You can bring up all the different subsidies that the energy companies, whether they're natural gas, electrical, Representative Wagenius, help me out here, the nuclear, whatever, get. So, Representative Franson, but I do know this, Representative Franson, I know this from the bottom of my heart. Your grandpa, Peter Benzoni, that great president of the United Steelworkers District 11, who served as the president when there were 30,000 hard rock miners members across the Upper Peninsula and across the state of Wisconsin and across the Iron Range of Minnesota. That great leader of the steelworkers is telling you right now from up above, Representative Franson, to support this bill. And you don't want to have to, you know, buy a bunch of dirt to fill in that spot, that divot that's going to be above his grave from rolling in it if you vote against this. So I would hope that you would think that, about that, besides thinking about Solyndra on this amendment. Thank you.
Member from Douglas, Representative Franson.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. Yes, Representative Rukavina, I think we can agree that, yes, indeed, my grandfather is rolling in his grave. However, at the same time, I'm sure my grandfather would be rolling in the grave on the spending and the mandates that we're doing on Minnesota. Representative Rukavina, if he would yield to another question.
He will yield, Representative Franson.
Thank you. Representative Rukavina, in 2009, there was a stimulus program, and the government committed nearly $40 billion to clean energy projects. And one of those first loan guarantees was to Solyndra. And the government there picked a loser, put about 1,000 people out of work, and the taxpayer is on the hook for $535 million. My question to you is this. What will be the cost of this mandate that you have that you are wanting to put on Minnesotans?
The member from St. Louis, Representative Rukavina.
Mr. Speaker, I don't, Representative Franson, I don't think there is a cost at all, because I think in about 4 or 5 years that the state and the state buildings and the local buildings included in this will be not only saving money, but probably making a little bit of money after they've paid off, you know, the initial cost, which isn't that great. Like I said, the largest system is going to cost $320,000. I think those electrical savings, those other savings that Representative Mahoney referred to, will be made, and that this will not cost the taxpayers anything. It will save them money. But on the other hand, you know, I know what things like the British petroleum spill in Louisiana, the Exxon Valdez has cost the taxpayers dearly, and you know, so the mandate that Governor Pelini gave on the 25 and 25, or 20 and 25, whatever it is, help me out here, members on my side of the aisle. I think that this helps with that, and you know, in other states that have had some type of a solar panel rebate program, which we have going now, Representative Francis, they've gone from like 1 megawatt of power to 4 or 5 megawatts in a short number of years, saving both the taxpayers' money and saving a little bit of the environmental negative contributions to the environment that come when we all use fossil fuels. No one can deny that.
The member from Douglas, Representative Franson.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. And, you know, Representative Rukavina, it's not that I'm opposed to clean energy. I just think at this time that the costs are still too great and the return of investment may be too low for taxpayers at this time. But certainly appreciate you bringing your amendment forward. Thank you.
Discussion. The gentleman from Swift, Representative Falk.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Franson yield for a question?
The lady from Douglas will yield. The gentleman from Swift.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Franson, I just have to set the record straight. You mentioned Solyndra. The loan program for that originated under which administration, if you would yield?
The lady from Douglas.
Representative Falk, I believe that originated under George Bush. And not that I agreed with everything that President Bush did, but we do have to protect the taxpayers. And unfortunately, there was some not very wise decisions being made at that time.
The gentleman from Swift.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yep, so the record is clear. The energy loan program came out of the 2005 Energy Policy Act by the Republican-controlled Congress, signed into law by President Bush, and it was a top Bush priority on January 15th, one of the top 3 energy priorities. So Solyndra, for all its benefits and purposes and its failures, was a Bush prerogative.
Discussion. Gentleman from Scott, Representative Beard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this is, while a heartfelt amendment, and I know in the 10 years I've been here, I've listened to my good friend from the Iron Range mention pro-Minnesota stuff several times. Just because it's pro-Minnesota, though, members, it doesn't mean it always makes sense in the big picture. This, at the end of the day, is a mandate that we're going to have to drive up building costs to favor an industry that's our hometown team. We could probably do the same with pacemakers or Scotch tape and bolster those industries. But you know, they seem to make sense in the marketplace and found their own way. I heard while I was combing my hair back there, Representative Rukavina introducing his amendment, he talked about jump-starting the industry. Members, I'm looking here on my master resource webpage. 1908, a gentleman in my home state of Pennsylvania said if we could just jump-start that industry, within a few years, solar could be replacing coal. And believe me, in the East Coast cities, they had trouble with coal for quite a while, with the dirt and the soot and so on and so forth. Who wouldn't want to get away from that? Well, that was 1908. They found out that natural gas did a much better job of replacing that than solar ever would. And here we are again today. Those of us who remember the first Earth Day back in the 1970, I think it was, I'm going to read a quote from Scott Sklar, Solar Energy Institute.
I think the consensus is, there's a great word, consensus, that after the year 2000, 20% of our energy would come from solar technologies quite easily because the government had been jump-starting the industry. I still have a poster in a file in my office of Jimmy Carter and saying that we will have 20% of our power by the year 2000, and it will only take $6 billion in federal subsidies to get there. Folks, we're 12 years past 2000. Solar is still less than 0.5%, and that mostly exists because it is a mandate, not because it's necessarily a good idea. Now again, I get it that this is heartfelt, hoping to jumpstart the home team industry, but folks, when they build a better mousetrap, all they'll need for us to do is to get out of their way, not get behind them with taxpayer dollars. I respectfully request you vote no on this amendment.
Member from Ramsey, Representative Knuth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members, and I appreciate Representative Beard's willingness to pat Representative Rukavina and say, well, this is heartfelt, and I sometimes feel that myself, and I'm glad it's not just me who gets comments about energy in such ways. But members, I ask that you to support Representative Rukavina's amendment. This amendment will help grow jobs in the state of Minnesota, and jobs that are looking forward into the 21st century, not jobs looking back into the 20th century. And the solar industry can do more in an economy and in an energy economy that it does in the United States. It's working very well in many other countries and evens out energy costs over time, makes us less dependent on sources of energy that are disruptive or that can have disruptive price shifts going up and down. We know that the price of a kilowatt of solar isn't going to go up or down once it's installed, and having this market for our solar technology manufactured here in Minnesota will give our manufacturers a base to build from and will demonstrate the many positive qualities of solar energy on our public buildings. You know, unfortunately, members, energy debates have started to become wedge issues, and it's really unfortunate for not just our state, but for the country. And Solyndra is the favorite, one of the favorite things to point to as a failure, and yep, there are going to be failures along the way with new energy technologies, and I don't necessarily like government picking winners and losers because they've been picking fossil fuel industry as winners over time. But members, I ask that we step back and take a look at this in terms of growing jobs in Minnesota, growing 21st century jobs in Minnesota, supporting this in a bipartisan way, because it'll make us more energy secure and independent, and when we really need jobs the most, and an electrical system that we can rely on without having major ups and downs in the cost. Solar's where the future is at, and I think Minnesotans should be building that future, and I appreciate Representative Rukavina's work on this amendment, and I plan to vote for it and hope you will as well.
Member from Pine, Representative Hilty. Pass. A member from Cass, Representative Howes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And, you know, folks, I was born and raised in South Minneapolis, moved up north to the woods, and when you get somebody who was born in the city and lives in the woods mixed up with a ranger, sometimes you never know exactly what's going to happen. But my senator has signed this letter, and he's not a ranger. I have one of those businesses in my district. I don't believe any of those are rangers. So, Representative Rukavina, I do support what you're doing. I think it's a good idea, and I'm going to let the body decide the fate of our ideas here.
Member from Wabasha, Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, first of all, I request a roll call.
Representative Drazkowski requests a roll call. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call on the amendment. The member from Wabasha, Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, members, this is another attempt at another government mandate to try to engineer the deployment in the private sector of energy jobs and energy sources throughout our economy. I think Representative Beard said it very well. Members, we don't have to go very far to look back at the failures of ethanol and what has happened there when we tried to engineer the development of ethanol in our economy and how that has fallen apart. We don't have to look very much further, members, than the renewable energy mandate that requires 25% by 25 to be renewable. That includes a situation that has occurred in our district, in my district, in Goodhue County, where now we have AWA Goodhue, a wind energy developer who now apparently is supposed to be under our seabed statute, which stands for Community-Based Energy Development. Well, let me tell you, members, how community-based this energy development is. It is owned either 99 or 100% by T. Boone Pickens, the billionaire from Texas. And right now what we have going on in Goodhue County is we have people in Goodhue County who have soundly rejected this industrial wind development of 400-foot wind towers, 52 of them throughout their county. And now we have AWA Goodhue, who has defaulted on their payments to the landowners who they have contracts with. They have defaulted, and the landowners have said, you know what, we want out of this because you aren't paying us. And so AWA Goodhue, the community-based energy developer, is suing those landowners, including an 85-year-old grandmother with Alzheimer's who is a property owner. That is what is going on with these mandates. And members, we have to stop bringing these mandates. They're failing, they're tearing our culture apart, and they're failing our economy. Members, I urge you to defeat this very poor amendment.
Members, if you would please, we have a former member in the chamber serving from 1999 through 2002, former Representative Dale Swapinski, backed by Representative Murphy. Please give him a warm welcome back to the House. The member from Carver, Representative Hoppe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I will pass.
The member from Grant, Representative Westrom.
Mr. Speaker, just a few questions for the author, if he would yield.
Representative Rukavina will yield. Representative Westrom.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Rukavina, I know we talked a little here before you got the amendment on the floor, but could you just shed some light on what the cost, if there's any additional cost to the building of the remodeling or to building buildings, and particularly I've got a bit of a concern with the photovoltaic part of your amendment. Representative Rukavina, voltaic is not as far along in cost competitiveness as solar thermal, and I'm wondering if you have any estimates or projections of cost, or is this a cost neutral proposal based on the language? I can't discern that.
Member from St. Louis, Representative Rukavina.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Westrom, on the it would be subsection on page 2 of the amendment, lines 2.16 through basically 2.24, give quite an exemption. First of all, let's say it's a HEPR project on the Alexandria, one of the Alexandria Minskew buildings, and it is not able, that structure, to carry any type of addition, or there's no place to put them up even on the grounds around there. It would be exempt. The commissioner may exempt appropriations for any major renovation of a building, like I talked to you about, say, the Veterans Affairs building that this year has a cost estimate of, or a request of, I don't know what it is in the bill, if it's 11 million still or what it is. But in any event, that would be exempt if it would cost them to have a cost overrun and not, say, let's say that they'd have to eliminate a couple of beds for the veterans. That would be exempted. Those types of decisions can be made by the commissioner all throughout this amendment. And as far, Representative, as an actual dollar cost, I can't tell you that, but the limit on any building, if it's whether it's a $10 million building or a $30 million renovation, the maximum on that would be about $8 a watt, or with the language that's in the amendment, about $320,000 would be the maximum dollar amount that could be spent on a system on a huge brand new building project. And on the smaller ones, if the 5% kicked in, let's say in Representative Dill's district that there's money in here, I know, for the Vermilion State Park, that they were going to build $1 million building. The maximum then cost would be $50,000 for solar, and of that, about $12,500 could be to heat up the water and that in the bathrooms that are going to be up there, so they would be the solar thermal. And the reason why, and the argument behind the solar photovoltaic, is because of the actual mandate that was mentioned about the 25 and 25 by Representative Drazkowski. The mandate that we have in current law regarding electrical generation. So that's the reason why, and we've had some very good results of the photovoltaic company that's up on the range, and the one that's in, I think, Representative Myra's district, that show that the lifespan of these photovoltaic cells now is far exceeding what currently happens. So with that, Representative Westrom, that's about all I can answer you on the cost. That the most expensive system would be $320,000, that typically they'll be a lot less, and that a lot of the buildings and renovations in the current bonding bill will be exempt if there's any hardship under this, just as as the commissioner determines.
The member from Grant, Representative Westrom.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If the author would continue to yield.
He will yield, Representative Westrom.
So Representative Rukavina, if I understand you correctly, you're saying any project, no matter the size, whether it's a $5 million addition to a building or a $20 million new building, you're saying the $320,000 you just talked about, is that the max? Is that correlative to the 40 kW language in the amendment? Or I'm a little unclear on that as well. Do we, as the building costs go up or the building project, the size of it goes up, are you requiring more, or is 40 kW the base size of the photovoltaic system that you're suggesting would be required on the buildings? Can you explain that a little bit more? When you say 320 is the most max cost per project, how do you arrive at that, and does that slide down from there depending upon the size of the project? If you could explain that a little further.
The member from St. Louis, Representative Rukavina.
Representative Westrom, you hit the nail on the head. The maximum amount, whether it's a $50 million building or a $10 million building, would be $320,000. Any smaller projects like a $5 million appropriation, let's say a $1 million building, like I said at Vermilion Park, if that's would be the amount, it would be 5% of that, or 50 grand. So the 5% only kicks in on smaller projects. The maximum allowed under any particular project in here, whether it's the University of Minnesota, a new building, or the Veterans Building, would be approximately $320,000, because right now the average is about $8 a watt, and that price, by the way, members, is going down very quickly as these photovoltaic cells get better and better. So yes, Representative Westrom, you understand it perfectly well. You always get the picture, buddy. By the way, I was standing the whole time you were questioning me. You just couldn't see me over the desk. Thank you.
The member from Grant, Representative Westrom.
Well, Mr. Speaker, Representative Rukavina, thanks for that clarification, because I was wondering why it was echoing off the top, but I just thought maybe you were speaking upward instead of across the desk. But Representative Rukavina, I'm a little torn on your amendment, Representative Rukavina. The solar thermal part, as you've talked about, is a more efficient technology right now. So I'm wondering why we only cap it at 25% of the installation because solar thermal, and out in Morris, where you've been, Representative Rukavina, in my district, we have some very good projects, practical projects. For example, on the University of Minnesota campus, Morris campus, there's a solar system that's been installed to heat the swimming pool at the Regional Fitness Center on the campus. Now, that is a very practical effect of a system that needs to be heated winter and summer, and so that solar system has been installed. Representative Rukavina, those types of applications where we have state buildings, I think, fit like a hand and glove. My reservation could be on this amendment that it goes too far, Representative Rukavina, or we drive up costs in areas where maybe there isn't as efficient or competitive dollars or a competitive project technology that's available to create electricity on state buildings. And so, Representative Rukavina, I'm wondering why we have that capped at 25%. You indicated because of the mandate, but I'm wondering if you'd be open to raising that on the amendment, or could you explain, if you'd yield for a question, why are we capping that at 25%? Because that is the efficient side of solar today as we know it.
The member from St. Louis, Representative Rukavina.
Representative Westrom, you know, you've come a long way since you got elected here. I remember when you first got here, you fought for your district as hard as I fought for mine. And in fact, when we had the solar program at Excel, you tried, like me, to get it for your constituents out there in the Alexandria area. And I know now, with your new training, Representative Westrom, as an attorney, that you've been taught, like all the great attorneys on this floor and all the great attorneys that have served in this body, to use common sense. So the common sense in this is that right now, as we'd say in Croatian, you know, bolje išta nego ništa, better something than nothing. You have nothing, I have nothing, our plants have nothing, and we're trying to put something in the bill. Now, if it makes it more palatable to you, and you can certainly get me some votes over there after Representative Drazkowski asked for a roll call, I would love to work with you in conference committee if we can get this on to change this language. But this is a language that was agreed upon by both the company that you have in your district and the company I have in mine. And I can't answer the question why, but the fact of the matter is that's the way the amendment was drafted for everybody involved, including solar thermal, solar voltaic, the governor's office, the other senators across the way who support this, yours, mine, and others. That's the way they drafted it. So that's all I can tell you. I agree with you. Representative Clark, for instance, I joked that her swimming pool, if it's still in the bonding bill, and I assume it is, you know, we could heat up the pool with your solar thermal. But we could also, you know, run some of the compressors and everything else with the photovoltaic. So perhaps that's why. But I know that practical, and I'm confident that my good friend from Elbow Lake will think about this and say, bolje išta nego ništa, better something than nothing right now. And so I would hope for your support, and we can work on what you proposed. And now what Representative Mahoney, now that he's off the floor, what he started, where the heck did he go? I could chew him out. But anyway, we'll work on it as we go to conference.
The member from Beltrami, Representative Purcell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I'm going to be brief. We've talked about this for a while. I rise in support of this amendment, and Representative Westrom and others. Good point on solar thermal. We have solar thermal up in my district. It works, and I think I heard a commitment from Representative Rukavina to try and work on that, hopefully in conference. Let's get this thing moving ahead, and ask for a green vote.
Member from Hennepin, Representative Hornstein.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And again, briefly, I want to rise to strongly support the Rukavina amendment. You know, we've had some discussion about, you know, why would the public sector be involved in this and supporting this? Well, Members, you know, the public sector is involved in supporting any and all sorts of energy that we use. For example, the United States Energy Information Administration has documented in 2010 alone $6.7 billion of support for coal, natural gas, petroleum, and nuclear, $1.1 billion for solar. So for every dollar we spend in federal money on solar, $7 on these other sources. So members, this is just a very minor but very helpful support for the solar industry and jobs in our state, and I'd urge you to strongly support this. This is nothing out of the ordinary that we don't do for other energy sources.
Discussion. Seeing no, I'm sorry, the member from Dakota, Representative McNamara.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I would just ask you to be opposed to this amendment. We should not be mandating something like this. With Representative Beard spoke to it. I think it's got a 50-year payout. It's not the right thing. The solar industry is evolving. We need to let it evolve more on its own. Please vote no.
The member from St. Louis, the author of the amendment, Representative Rukavina.
I'm like a duck that just got winged by Representative McNamara now, you know. I mean, all of those things you support, Representative McNamara, clean water, you know, clean wildlife management areas, all those things that are so environmentally necessary that you wouldn't support this, Representative McNamara. And just quickly, Representative Beard, you know, in 1908 that you referred to, that airplane that you fly, I think was made out of balsa wood or spruce maybe, and canvas. There were no satellites, there were no helicopters, there were, you know, no automobiles to speak of. The world has changed as much as you and I don't want it to have changed that much since 1908, Representative Beard. But the world has changed, the solar panels have gotten better. So I would hope that members would support the amendment. It's a good one. It'll help the governor and the other side, the other body, pass this bonding bill out.
Seeing no further discussion, a roll call being requested, the clerk will take the roll on the amendment. Clerk will close the roll. There being 62 ayes and 69 nays, the amendment is not adopted. There are several amendments at the desk. The clerk will report the next amendment.
House moving to amend House File 1752, the first engrossment as amended as follows. The amendment is coded 583.
Call the member from Cass, Representative House, to the author's amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and my apologies to you, Mr. Speaker, and to the body. I'm going to incorporate an oral amendment to this, and then I will explain.
Representative House, state your incorporated amendment or modification to your amendment to the Chief Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On page 24, delete lines 20 through 23. And reinstate from an earlier oral amendment on page 57, reinstate section 52. I'll explain when the clerk reports the amendment.
Chief Clerk will report the modification to the author's amendment.
I guess on 24 we don't know what line. On page 24, what are the lines that you wanted to delete?
Representative Howells, please restate your modification to your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On page 24, lines 20 through 23.
Howells is modifying his amendment as follows. On page 24, delete lines 20, 21, 22, and 23. And then on page 57, reinstate
the stricken section 52, which was deleted earlier.
Representative Howes, has the Chief Clerk accurately reported your modification to your amendment?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Howes, please explain the modification to your author's amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First, I'll talk to the amendment. And we missed some language in putting the bill together with some projects that would come out of the deed fund. And I think it's only fair that if there are projects from non-state sources or contributions from non-state sources made before a grant award is to be made, they can count towards the match requirement. And then with the section 52 that I reinstated, you know, like I said earlier, I was born and raised in South Minneapolis, moved north, met another ranger, Representative Anzelk, and we had a rather heated discussion earlier in the retiring room, and lo and behold, we were both wrong. So I'll let Representative Anzelk speak to that portion if Representative Anzelk would yield.
He will yield. The member from Itasca, Representative Anzelk.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members, and special thanks to you, to the author, Representative Howes. The Section 52 reinstatement is okay. The subject matter of Section 52 is eminent domain, which, as you might expect, gives lots of us from Greater Minnesota great heartburn. But I have been assured by the department that this provision pertains only to a health and safety project involving the dewatering of a pit, which is affecting the health and safety of citizens of the community of Beauvais, and is not pertaining to mineral rights or any mining activity along the western Mesabi. So I thank the author, Representative Howes, for reinstating this, and I urge concurrence with the amendment in total.
Member from Cass, Representative Howes, you still have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Hausman yield? Representative Hausman.
She will yield. Representative Howes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Hausman, would you explain why I deleted on page 24 lines 21, 22, and 23?
The member from Ramsey, Representative Hausman.
Yes, Mr. Speaker and Representative Howes, the CTIB folks tell us that that it would not be an eligible project for CTIB. I spoke to Representative Holberg. She said it was put in there as sort of, they thought they were helping Minneapolis with a match, but I see she's on the floor. My understanding is we're all okay with just removing it as technically not workable.
Member from Cass, Representative Howes. The member from Scott, Representative Biskins.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This is what I was talking about when we get a delete all amendment on the House floor, where even the author, we start with a delete all amendment, and the author has to make oral amendments to his delete all amendment. And now he's got another written amendment in which he has to add 2 more oral amendments, one undoing an earlier oral amendment. Members, this is sloppy work. We should send this bill back to committee so that these pieces can all be fully vetted, and we can come back with something that the people of the state should have some confidence in.
Member from Dakota, Representative McNamara.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would ask members to support the House oral amendment. Section 52 does deal with an important issue, as Representative Anzelk and Representative McElfatrick know, protection of Beauvais or Beauvais, depending on how you want to pronounce it, but it's real important. And unfortunately, there's a small piece of property there with 15 different fractional owners, and they don't even actually add up to 100%. So we're trying to just make it easier to make sure this project, it was a few years old, those appropriations run out this year, so please vote yes.
The member from Ramsey, Representative Hausman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And in defense of the author, I want to say This is absolutely, it can't be categorized as sloppy work. It's the opposite. You cannot work on the language until spreadsheet is agreed to and then language after. And what I would suggest is that the author in this case is being flexible with a number of people who have seen this, and there are technical changes that are either workable or not. And I would suggest that in this case the author is being flexible and cooperative and just object to the idea of sloppy work here.
The member from Itasca, Representative McElfatrick.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I am rising to speak with Representative Van Zels and Representative McNamara to Section 52. That is an important provision. It is important to the area. This is a project that's been in process for some time, and by including this language in this bill, it will allow the DNR to move ahead on an issue that matters to a great deal of people. So I would urge you to allow that to be replaced into this bill. Thank you.
Member from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Point of parliamentary inquiry.
State your point of parliamentary inquiry.
Mr. Speaker, I'm a little confused about exactly how we're proceeding here. We have in front of us an amendment 583. Are these oral amendments to the 583 amendment, or are they modifications to something that we already adopted? That was what it sounded like. I just want to make sure that we all know what we're doing.
Sure, Representative Liebling, we have the author's amendment, Representative Howe's amendment before us. He is allowed to modify his amendment as he introduces it on the House floor. These are modifications to Representative Howe's RA 12-583 amendment on the floor before the body at this time. Further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, all in favor of the author's amendment signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The motion prevails. There is several amendments at the desk. The clerk will report the next amendment.
Drazkowski moving to amend the delete all amendment to House File 1752 as follows. The amendment is coded A21.
Call the member from Wabasha, Representative Drazkowski, to your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speakers. Mr. Speaker, members, the A21 amendment removes line 214 from the spreadsheet, which is a $50 million slush fund or blank check for the administration to decide exactly how they're going to spend the $50 million. And it does what this legislature should do, and that is to exercise leadership in determining if we are going to spend that $50 million, if we're going to borrow it from the people and then charge them to pay the debt service on it. We should decide what that money is used for. We should not abdicate our responsibility. Members, what the amendment does is eliminates line 214, and it transfers the $50 million to the local road fund, which is located on page 21. So this would actually bring that money, members, to our local roads that our local counties and townships get assistance. There's actually two parts to that local road section that the money can be used for. It would use it for something that's truly undoubtedly a legitimate function of bonding of this state government, and that is to properly fix our roads in this state. I encourage you to support this amendment.
Discussion. The member from Washington, Representative Dean.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Drazkowski, for bringing this forward. Particularly for rural Minnesota and roads, it's a very important thing. And I'm wondering if we might think about this. What we are doing with our roads in many cases is we're telling the Department of Transportation, you know, don't build a road here, don't build a highway here, don't build this interchange here. We don't do that because we don't want to make those decisions here on the House floor. So we want to try to move away from earmarking as much as possible within DOT, and I think DOT does a very good job of prioritizing their projects from the most pressing, most needed projects on down. We give them authority, and they make those determinations and distribute those projects to eliminate earmarking so that projects that a turnpike or a road or a cloverleaf isn't built in somebody's district where it doesn't need it as much as another one. So we give some of that authority to the Department of Transportation, and in this case, we're trying a pilot project for the Department of Economic Development to say, what if we tried to do the same thing? It's based on some federal anti-earmarking reform, and I think it's worth trying out. I think it's perhaps innovative. So I would respectfully speak against the Drazkowski amendment, but I really appreciate and affirm Representative Drazkowski standing up for rural roads and infrastructure across the state of Minnesota.
Discussion. The member from Ramsey, Representative Hausman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, once you get a package together and have agreement among 4 caucuses, it is always easy to come to the floor and we could start rearranging the bill. I would be sorely tempted in a lot of parts of this bill to do that. But when you need bipartisan cooperation to pass a bill like a bonding bill, one has to be very careful about taking money from one part of the bill to another, even when it is a noble purpose. Even when it is a noble purpose. So though it is tempting, members, I would encourage us to, in this case, support the bill's author and help him keep his bill intact by defeating the amendment.
Member from Cass, Representative Howes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would ask for a no vote.
The member from Wabasha.
Thank you,
Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd ask for a roll call on the amendment.
Representative Drazkowski has requested a roll call. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call on the amendment. Discussion to the amendment. Member from Wabasha, Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker and members, let me tell you a little bit about what happens when we turn money over to deed in the name of business development, or that's what I understand that line 214 and the $50 million is intended to do. We have a development at Pine Island. It's called Elk Run, and I know Representative Mahoney was very involved with the business infrastructure committee that he was involved with in last biennium. But what has happened here, with very good intentions from the legislature to earmark these monies through deed in the name of business development, is we have a $38 million interchange now at south of Pine Island, just on the southern edge of my district, that is being built. I understand there were supposed to be something like 200 jobs there 2 years ago in order for these dollars to be spent. That was part of the agreement. Well, members, the jobs are not there. There are no buildings there. But there is a $38 million infrastructure development through deed as outlined in that bonding appropriation from several years ago. Members, what this amendment would do and the effect that it would have is that it would send the money to the local road improvement fund for the ability there for the department to use the money for roads with statewide or regional significance, or for grants to counties to assist in paying the cost of rural road safety and improvement projects. And members, this would be safety and improvement projects that the Department of Transportation has already prioritized these projects, and this would allow them to use these bonding dollars against or with their current prioritized list, and they would apply it to that list. Projects like the intersection of County Road 9 in Goodhue County and U.S. Highway 52, where just last fall, within 1 week in 2 different accidents, 3 people died. Members, these are the types of projects that should be a priority for our body. They should be a priority for Minnesota. I encourage you to support us getting these dollars to where they need to be, and that is to make life safer in Minnesota on our roads and provide for better commerce. I appreciate your support.
Discussion. The member from Ramsey, Representative Mahoney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted to clarify something. Representative Drazkowski left the impression that DEED funded a $32 million transportation project down at Pine Island. There was less than, I think it was 2.5, it might have been $3 million for sewer and water at Pine Island prior to the economic downturn that we had. So DEED would not be using any of this money in that particular fashion to build roads. So I don't want anyone to have that wrong impression. And as I understand it, that road has not even been started yet. It's been proposed, but it's been put on hold. So that Pine Island development was less than a few million dollars, probably $2 or $3 million. It was done prior to the huge devaluation of our homes and our rise in unemployment. And at the time, it did make good economic sense. It made very good, much better economic sense than many of the other projects that had come before it. So just don't want that to be a separate, I want that to be separate.
Further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, roll call being requested. The clerk will take the roll on the amendment. Clerk will close the roll. There being 47 ayes and 84 nays, the amendment is not adopted. There are several amendments at the desk. The clerk will report the next amendment.
Runbeck moving to amend House File 1752. The second engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded A29.
Call the member from Anoka, Representative Runbeck, to present your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker and members, this amendment deals with a little section of the Metro Freeway system that probably 60% of us travel across a number of times a week. And I'm referring to the I-694 and Rice Street passage. We know of the tremendous infrastructure improvement that took place with the Unweave the Weave construction project several years ago. What that effectively did was to push congestion just a bit further down the road. We're talking about just a 2.5-mile strip of roadway that remains the only significant segment of the Metro Freeway system that does not have three lanes of general purpose traffic in each direction. And so this would earmark, members, the piece that has to do with the Transportation Economic Development Program. And I only bring this is not in my district. I think it's just something we all can relate to. It seems it's kind of a straggler into the whole piece of improvement at the Metro Freeway system. It's the only one segment around the system has more congestion than this piece, and that is over at I-494 in Bloomington. Along this stretch, we've got 20 major employers. This is a major significant freight transitway. It seems to me, and actually I've got a letter here dated November 1999 in which MnDOT says they will proceed and prepare to let the Rice Street Bridge project in 2004. So, I mean, this has been, of course, discussed for going on 15 years. And I am just going to ask that we, in this case, earmark and get this thing going. Last year, we had $55 million in the bonding bill that was for transportation, economic development, and so on. And the problem with earmarking is that we're just getting around now to confirming the applicants. They have just been notified, in April. that their project from last year is going to get underway and so on. I mean, this competitive idea sounds good on paper, but in effect it slows down the process, slows down getting the money out there, putting people to work. It chews up a lot of time. And so it seems that it isn't serving the legislature very well or the taxpayer very well. We would be wiser, I think, to actually get some projects underway, identify them, and get going. So I urge your support on this amendment, members, and thanks for your support.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. And I rise to speak against this amendment. Not that that bridge doesn't need to be replaced, but I drive that stretch every day to and from the Capitol. And if we take care of that bridge, and there is room underneath that bridge to put another lane in, squeeze another lane in. But the problem at that intersection or that section is not that bridge as much as if you go just west of there, there's 2 railroad bridges and a pedestrian bridge that are not wide enough to put it in. So if you replace that bridge, you're just moving it down a quarter of a mile to these 2 railroad bridges, which are the biggest problem in that section there right now. So I would rise to speak against this. Plus, as our illustrious majority leader spoke about, we in the past, we do not direct MnDOT to do the projects. We give them the money, and they tell them to use their best judgment as to plan these roads out, to use the money they're given as best as they can. If we start earmarking, we're going to be starting to picking and choosing on the House floor here every project that MnDOT has to do, and that is not a good way for us to go down to start directing them where to use their limited funds. So again, I rise to oppose this amendment.
The member from Rams, Representative Scalzi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I rise in support of this amendment by Representative Runbeck. Some of these companies are in my district, some are not, but we're talking here about completing a segment that was promised in 1994 by MnDOT. It was promised in 1994. Through the years, other projects have risen above this little tiny segment that completes the whole reconstruction of the northern 694. These are, you know, we're talking today about maybe providing a subsidy to a large corporation in Minnesota. These are companies here in this area. Think of Land O'Lakes. These are long-lasting, high-paying jobs. These companies are having a difficult time getting their customers, their workers, any visitors. They just can't get to Land O'Lakes, Boston Scientific, Cummins Power Generation, H.B. Fuller, Deluxe Corporation. We've got terrible congestion in this one little segment, and I urge members to vote in support of this amendment.
Further discussion, the member from Cass, Representative Howes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I would urge a no vote on this. We tried real hard when we put this bill together not to do the so-called earmark, and so far we're doing pretty good. If we do this, then I can imagine 80 other members would want a local project earmarked. So vote no.
Further discussion, the member from Anoka, Representative Runbeck.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Howes take a question?
He will yield. Representative Runbeck.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Howes, you know, looking at the process of these competitive grants, you know, it's one of those mysterious processes, and I'm wondering if you can guide those of us who want to move a project a little faster and get it to be accepted. What is the follow-up then if this bill passes with just you know, broad grant? What do we do? How do we contact to really bring attention to an important project?
The member from Cass, Representative Howes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Runbeck, I don't know if there's a guidebook or a rule book, but what I've done in the past, I've gone to the commissioner of MnDOT or DNR or the governor's office or the administration. I've talked to the city or local unit of government that wants it. I get them to talk together. I work real hard with whoever's in charge of allocating these funds. And do I always succeed? No. But if you sit down and talk with these people, show your case, plead your case, I would say over 50% of the time I've been very successful in getting something done and making it work. So I would recommend you simply get a hold of the Commissioner and other folks involved and work real hard to get it done.
Further discussion? The member from Anoka, Representative Runbeck.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to withdraw the amendment. I appreciate the work that has been done putting this bill together. I don't know that we get much out of an earmark process, but hopefully this project and others that people care about will be raised in terms of their visibility and work can be progressed. Thank you.
Representative Runbeck withdraws the A29 amendment. There are several amendments at the desk. The clerk will report the next amendment.
Khan and others moving to amend House File 1752 as amended as follows. The amendment is coded A22.
Call on the member from Hennepin, Representative Khan, to present your amendment.
Mr. Speaker and members, this is just an attempt, this amendment, what this amendment is, and it was, the idea for this amendment came to me when Representative Biskins was going after the Port Authority of Duluth in the actions in the pension bill, which he fortunately withdrew because that was all right. But one of the things that it brought attention to is that the misuse of the word port in Minnesota statute. So what this amendment is a defense of literacy in the state, for us not to be maligned by people throughout the country. What this amendment does is recognizes the dictionary definition of port, which I have also looked up. I mean, there are several other words ways that the word is used, but what the word really means is if you look at the of the language, a port ought to be a port, which is a place of harbor, and it's and must have operating bulkheads, jetties, piers, wharves, or landing places for water transfer utilized by non-passenger boats or vessels used in navigating the waters of this state. And what this does is that we've seen misuse of the concept of port authority by people forming places that have no relationship to water, no ability to have a real port, calling themselves ports just because it gets them into an easier form of economic development. I'm not opposed to that. I just want to clean up the language in statute. And if you want to have an economic development authority that can do the same things as a port authority does, don't call yourself a port. If you're a port, you ought to meet what the dictionary definition, what the whole world understands a port to be. So I ask for your support for this amendment.
Discussion. The member from St. Louis, Representative Huntley.
Well, members, and I was interested to see Representative Biskins on this amendment, since he talked about how we ought to have hearings on things. And the two authors of this amendment don't know what the implications of this are. Let me explain to you. There are about 30 port authorities in the state, and roughly 5 of them are actually ports. And some of those ports, the Port Authority does not own the docks and the landing stuff. They're owned by grain companies. They're owned by barge companies. These were set up because the state law gave them some advantages. They were to do two things. One is to do port activities, and the other is to do economic development. And there are certain incentives and things in the law that make it easy to do those two things if you qualify and call yourself a port authority. What this amendment does is eliminate all those port authorities that really aren't port authorities from taking part in economic development and the advantages that are put into state law. Secondly, as I said, there are some places that really are ports, but the Port Authority does not own the loading and unloading docks and so on. this would also eliminate them from taking advantage of the state laws that relate to these things. So Representative Biskins talked earlier about how we ought to have hearings so we really know what we're dealing with, and he talked about sloppy work. Well, this amendment is really sloppy.
The member from Scott, Representative Biskins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and to the member from Duluth. You've already, with your vote and the vote of many others on this body, have said that the need to have public hearings isn't all that important. In fact, you voted against having public hearings on a bill that is ready to put the taxpayers of the state of Minnesota another $490 or $540 million in debt, depending upon how you're counting it. So, yeah, maybe pot, kettle, I don't know. However, if you want to call sloppy putting into state law that to be a port authority you ought to have a port, if you want to call sloppy saying words should mean things and our English language should mean something, well, if that's what you call sloppy in Duluth, which I don't think it is, but if that's what the representative from sloppy or from Duluth wants to call sloppy, then I guess that's your choice. But I know in Scott County, if something is called a port authority, we assume there's a port there.
The member from Cass, Representative Howes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With all due respect to the two authors of the amendment, I don't think this is the bill we want to put this in. I mean, we're talking about ports. We could be talking about airports, carports. Who knows? And I really would not like to put language into the bonding bill that eliminates something that we're not real sure we want to eliminate. So I'd say vote no.
Member from Ramsey, Representative Mahoney.
Members, vote no. This amendment does more damage than anything else. Please vote no.
Member from Dakota, Representative Hansen. Pass. Seeing no further discussion. I'm sorry, the member from Hennepin, Representative Kahn.
Mr. Speaker, just a response to Representative Huntley. And first of all, there were public hearings on the issue of the Port Authority of Duluth pension issue. There were public hearings in the Pension Commission. We heard from Duluth and we totally agreed with it. What this specifically does is just say that it's time for us to make our laws conform with plain English, and it's time for us to not have a total absurdity in state law. There's no question that we can give all these things that you want to. There are 27, at least according to statute, probably more by special law, port authorities in the state, of which probably 5 to 10 of them are ports. And I assure you that Duluth is a serious port, and it does fall into the definition. But I urge you people to go Google and look at the definition. You have to go to definition of port, and if you don't think it's a strong, sweet, typically dark red fortified wine originally from Portugal, typically drunk as a dessert wine, you'll see that there is no definition of port that covers its use in the state of Minnesota. And this is an example of saying it's time for us to change, and it's time for us to conform to the plain English use of the word. And there's nothing that will stop all of these entities that have just taken advantage of sloppy English to go on doing exactly what they're doing. They just need a new name.
Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the Kahn amendment signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. No. Amendment is not adopted. There's an amendment to this. Clerk, report the next amendment.
Purcell moving to amend House File 1752, the first engrossment as amended as follows. The amendment is coded 588.
Calling the member from Beltran, Representative Purcell, to present your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I was looking over the bill that's before us, and hasn't been in front of us for very long here the last few hours. And I see the funding that's provided, the bonding that's provided for military affairs, for veterans in general, and I believe that we need to have some priorities, and my priority is to get some funding out here for veterans and veterans that need our assistance. We've all talked about that over the months and the few years that I've been here. Everybody's carries the flag for veterans, and I just believe that we need to stand behind that flag, and let's honestly put some funding toward veterans that really do need it. And so my amendment, I'm proposing to move some funding from the Fort Ripley Education Center. And mind you, I don't have anything against Fort Ripley. It's a good place. I spent a couple of years in the Army Reserves after I was in the active military, and did some time there. You vets know what I'm talking about, and it's a nice place. But what we're talking about there is spending $19 million on an addition for education, and standalone project. I'd support that hands down, but we don't have but a couple of $1 million in here that's actually going to support veterans out in Minnesota. And so what I want to do is take $10 million and put toward the Minneapolis Veterans Home, where we have some dire needs. I think many of you have read about that over the last weeks and months. And I have a project up in my neck of the woods, a northern Minnesota Veterans Home, that we're trying to get some planning money for, $250,000, and I want to put some money towards that. I've got more than 30,000 veterans up there, and we just simply don't have the facility to meet the needs of the veterans up there. So that's my request, Mr. Speaker, and I look across at my colleagues, and I just ask for a sincere vote on this, that we really put our this money where our mouth is, and we say we support veterans, and we can do what we need to do for education centers, but let's get something in here that really steps up for veterans in Minnesota, and I ask for your support on this.
Member from Cass, Representative Howes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I know there are others who would like to speak to this, and I admire what you're trying to do, Representative Purcell, but if you look at the Camp Ripley Education Center addition money, it's to complete the construction, furnishing, and equipping. Complete. So they are ready to go. We can put people to work immediately and get this taken care of. If you look at the Minneapolis Veterans Home building, this is for pre-design and design for demolition of the south wing of Building 17 and adjoining, et cetera, et cetera. So if we give them more money, it's going to take them, I'd say on average 3 to 9 months just of planning and preparation before they can actually do anything, whereas at Camp Ripley we can get it done. And again, the 4 caucuses and leadership have agreed that we've put together a good bill. I think it's a good bill, and I would ask members to vote no on the Purcell amendment.
Member from St. Louis, Representative Moline.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members, and I rise in support of the Purcell amendment. You know, I'm sure we had a hearing on the Camp Ripley bonding request. I don't specifically remember it, even though I'm a committee member, and that's probably because it's not something that really stuck out in my mind, that we had to have $19.5 million education center at Camp Ripley, but something that really did stick out to me is we had a lot of hearings on homeless vets, and it's a huge problem in Minnesota. St. Louis County has the highest percentage of homeless vets in the state, and I know that Representative Purcell and Representative Ward's area through sort of north central, northwest Minnesota is second. And I think that it is really important that we care for our veterans, and they face barriers in greater Minnesota that are unique. You know, my father's a veteran and he volunteers for the Iron Range vets, and he has to drive these guys down to the Twin Cities for medical treatment. And then if some of them need to go into a nursing home, into a veterans home, they have to go all the way to Silver Bay or Superior, away from their friends and their family and people that they love and care about in order to be in a veterans home. We are in grave need for another veterans home in northern Minnesota. This is a fair amendment. It still allows a good chunk of money for Camp Ripley, and it also allows for another veterans home. So I would ask that members vote in support of the Purcell amendment.
Member from Washington, Representative Creasel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I also respect what Representative Purcell is trying to accomplish here. I think it's a good idea, but at the same time, we can't be taking from our current men and women serving in the Minnesota National Guard. There's a reason we have the best National Guard in the United States, and it's because how prepared and trained and ready our group is to accomplish whatever mission we throw at them. They've been to Iraq, Afghanistan, Kuwait, Kosovo. We continue to ask more and more of them. But we need to also make sure that they're trained and prepared so they can come home safe from these missions. And that's why we need these education centers. And while I do understand and support the need for more veterans homes and veterans hospitals, we cannot be taking away from the men and women that are currently serving in the military. So I would respectfully ask for a no on this amendment.
The member from Crow Wing, Representative Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I rise in opposition to the Purcell amendment as well. And members, you know, everybody that has stood up so far is correct. Representative Molina is correct in that we have a major problem with homeless vets. Representative Purcell is correct that we have a need for a nursing home, especially in greater Minnesota, out in rural Minnesota, out in central Minnesota, northern Minnesota. Matter of fact, members, it wasn't that long ago that the Department of Veteran Affairs did a survey and found that Brainerd, Little Falls, and Crosby came up as the main area in the state for the need for the next nursing home in the state. I think there's only one nursing home in the state that has been proposed. It has the federal funding approved of right now, but members, we need to have a great need out in greater Minnesota and especially central and northern Minnesota. So Representative Purcell is correct, and I get it and I understand why he's doing this, but so is Representative Creasel correct in the fact that we have an education center down at Camp Ripley that I and Representative Howes have trained, and the need is there to make sure that our current military men and women have the training and expertise that they're given, and the training center is so much needed down in Camp Ripley as well. The expansion of the training center and to make sure that our soldiers, men and women in the military willing to serve us are the best trained and properly trained and have the facilities that they need so that in order to protect our freedoms. So members, I'm going to regretfully, but ask you to vote no on this Representative Purcell's amendment, because it is so needed much more in Camp Ripley. But we also need nursing homes in the state of Minnesota. I get that. And Representative Purcell, you and I are going to arm wrestle about where it goes or whatever, left-handed, of course. But we'll tackle that another time. Thank you, members.
Member from Morrison, Representative Lemire.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I respectfully ask you also to oppose the Purcell amendment. Camp Ripley not only trains our soldiers, but they also train our interagency partners, whether it's Health and Human Services, Department of Public Safety, Homeland Security, the DNR, the troopers, and the police and fire and the EMS will all use this facility. So it has statewide significance, and I applaud you for your efforts in this matter, but we need to have our soldiers to be the best they can be, and this facility would do it, so I appreciate a no vote.
Member from Hennepin, Representative Thiessen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Not to repeat everything that everybody said, but this bill, you know, I would have obviously liked a larger bill. Maybe we could have done some of these things, but this bill has been worked out in a bipartisan basis, and I would urge a no vote on the amendment.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Mullery. The member from Anoka, Representative Abler.
Just to say something different, and people can vote how they want, but I want to point out that this doesn't house any homeless vets. This is for a nursing home, and nursing homes aren't for homeless people. If there's a need for homeless shelters, which Anoka has a need, and Representative Creasel, who will be our new VSO, is going to come up and work on that with me. But so that's just as you vote on this, you'll understand what you're voting for, what you're not voting for. The nursing homes in the state are something in the low 90% of capacity, and I think that there's that capacity where they need it. If we want to work in this next year, I'd be happy to work on that as well with people and see if there's a need for veterans ones specifically.
Member from Itasca, Representative Anzels.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I'm sure that all of us share with Representative Purcell the outcome that he's trying to accomplish here. And I just want you to know that what really needs to happen for veterans, regardless of where they live, is that the long-term care dollar, the federal long-term care dollar, needs to follow the veteran rather than have the veteran chase and seek Veterans Affairs funding. And what needs to happen is that when there are veteran certified and Medicare certified beds in skilled care facilities, regardless of the community and regardless of where they are, the veteran ought to have preference in terms of filling that bed. And so what really needs to happen is some action at the federal level in the United States Congress so that federal veterans benefits follow the veteran rather than to create this patchwork quilt of services that we have today. Thank you.
Member from St. Louis, Representative Gauthier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This is a difficult amendment. It puts us in having to make choices whether to train soldiers or to care for soldiers that have given sacrifice to their country and to their state. And it's a difficult one. I was fortunate last year that we got $300,000 for homeless vets in Duluth, and it was a drop in the bucket. And not only do we suffer from the needs of nursing homes, but we need mental health and we need job training. We need all kinds of things, members, for our veterans. But today we need to make a choice. And it seems to me that veterans shouldn't have to go from Bemidji, Minnesota to Minneapolis, St. Paul for their care after having given so much to their country. So I would ask you to vote green.
Member from Wright, Representative Anderson B.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Anzel yield for a question?
He will yield. Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Anzel, do you recall when this bill was in the committee to have heard before State Government Finance if Military Affairs or Veterans Affairs testified in response to your presentation, or I should say your community's presentation on this issue?
The member from Itasca, Representative Anzels.
I do recall the dialogue, and I would refer your question, however, to the author of the amendment, Representative Purcell, if he would yield for an answer to your question.
Representative Anderson B., you still have the floor. If you'd like, you can ask Representative Purcell to yield to the question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, if Representative Purcell would yield to the question.
He will yield. The member from Beltrami, Representative Purcell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Anderson, if I heard the question correctly, it was in regard to the presentation that was given by community members from Bemidji in regard to the northern Minnesota Veterans Home, and I do recall that quite vividly.
The member from Wright, Representative Anderson.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Purcell, then did you hear any testimony given by the Department of Military Affairs or Veterans Affairs in response to your presentation that was given? Because I know they were in the audience that day, but I don't recall them speaking to the issue of what you're presenting here or not. And I just wanted to, I don't recall that, but maybe you recall them coming forward saying yes, they agree with your presentation, or they had their priorities situated in a different direction. So I just wanted to get some feedback from you, if you recall that, if he would yield.
The member from Beltrami will yield. Representative Purcell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Anderson, I do not recall public testimony by military affairs against the Northern Minnesota Veterans Home.
Member from Wright, Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And neither do I, and I'm not sure if any other of the members in our State Government Finance recall any testimony given from Military Affairs or the Department of Veterans Affairs saying yay or nay on this. And I know that we were asked by the bonding committee to give a rating of the projects that were presented to us in State Government Finance. And maybe Representative Lanning, who the chair of the State Government Finance, could tell me how this particular issue landed as far as its rating in our committee.
Representative Lanning will yield. The member from Clay, Representative Lanning.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Anderson. I don't have that tally sheet with me. If you would give me a little time, we'll try to get that so we can answer your question.
Member from Wright, Representative Anderson B.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Lanning, I don't recall it reaching the top 5 or 6 of the lists that come back to us as being one that the Veterans Affairs or Military Affairs or the members of our committee even were putting up as high priorities going forward to the bonding committee. So I would, unless there's some verification from other members of our committee that know or had feedback on that issue, I am at the present situation looking at asking the members to look at this bill. And as much as we need it to help our veterans, myself being a veteran included, and others here on the floor, I would like to see this bill be brought up again, or this amendment brought up in a different vein or different light.
Discussion. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the Purcell amendment signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. No. The amendment is not adopted. There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the next amendment.
Abler and others moving to amend House File 1752 as amended as follows. The amendment is coded 584.
Member from Anoka, Representative Abler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm bringing this as a friend of the bill. This section about getting rid of earmarking, I think, is really a good idea, and I support it. But the language is a little unclear, and I asked the author earlier in my questioning, and I've come up with language with Ms. Dyson which clarifies it. And it's simply, instead of having a list, it allows that those building things that are includable as options, and so I'd ask for your support.
Discussion. The member from Cass, Representative Howes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I support what Representative Abler is doing. Vote yes.
Further discussion. All those in favor of the Abler amendment signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The amendment is adopted. There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the next amendment.
Drazkowski moving to amend House File 1752 as amended as follows. The amendment is coded 586.
Call the member from Wabasha, Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, each year, as you know, we have a constitutional amendment known as a legacy amendment that was passed in 2008 with about 56% of the vote in Minnesota that collects from Minnesotans in the form of sales tax about $280 million a year. Members, this money is dedicated to outdoor activities in the area of our Outdoor Heritage Fund, our Clean Water Fund, our Parks and Trails Fund, and our Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. Members, what this amendment does is I have identified the areas in this bonding bill that relate to and actually are items that fit very well as legacy type projects. They very well could be offered and very likely will be offered in the future in legacy amendments. I would expect Members, what this does is pays back those items, pays back those bonds, the debt service on those bonds with legacy dollars from their respective categories. Now, there may be questions about the amounts, members. In the Outdoor Heritage Fund, it amounts to $8.5 million. The Clean Water Fund is $9 million. The Parks and Trails Fund is $10.5 million. The Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund is $6.513 million. Members, this, as I mentioned, would pay the debt service on those from those legacy accounts, would amount to $207,000 in legacy funding in fiscal year 13, $1.9 million fiscal year 14, $3.14 million in fiscal year 14, which is just over 1% of the legacy dollars. Members, this is the fiscally responsible thing to do. We have these types of proposals coming from the DNR and other areas, left and right, up and down, every angle that we seem to see in the legislative session, from the LCCMR to the legacy dollars to general fund appropriations, and over $50 million of DNR proposals, a good number of which can be funded or could be funded alternatively through legacy. Members, this amendment captures those, does a fiscally responsible thing, and uses those legacy dollars to pay the debt service instead of going out and once again taxing our Minnesota businesses and homeowners to pay off that debt service. I would encourage your support for the amendment, and Mr. Speaker, I would ask for a roll call.
Roll call on the amendment being requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call on the amendment. The member from Meeker, Representative Erdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members, and I certainly appreciate the attempts by Representative Drazkowski in bringing this issue forward, and I appreciate the passion with which he does present it. But I do not consider this to be a liberal or a conservative issue. It simply is a matter of the Constitution, and the fact that in the Constitution it says that we must not use traditional forms of funding for legacy money, and that this does raise a question with our Constitution.
The member from Dakota, Representative Wardlow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members. The constitutional question with regard to this amendment has been raised. If you look at the actual Constitution and its plain language, and as you all know, the legislature is a coordinate and separate branch of government that can determine for itself what a particular constitutional amendment means. And in fact, we are the most appropriate body to do so, since this body, along with the Senate, actually proposed this amendment to the people, who then ratified it. The language of the amendment states that the dedicated money under the section must supplement traditional sources of funding for the purposes listed in the section, and may not be used as a substitute. That's the language to which Representative Erdahl referred. Members, I question what exactly a traditional source of funding for debt service for purposes enumerated in the amendment here exactly is. What would the traditional source be? And are we substituting for that source? Those are very broad terms, and it's a very open question. But certainly, one could argue, and I do argue, that by paying debt service using dedicated funds, we are supplementing the funding for these important items and not substituting anything. Members, this section of the Constitution is actually not very well drafted. Previous legislature drafted it, and it admits to many meanings. So do not let any qualms about the language of the Constitution in this section deter you from voting for this very good amendment. I urge a green vote.
Members, the amendment is still being distributed. Oh, we do have, as the debate continues, the amendment will not be adopted or will not be voted on, however, until each member has received a copy. The member from Cass, Representative Howes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would ask for a no vote on this amendment.
The member from Dakota, Representative McNamara.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I would ask you to oppose the amendment. I think it's a real bad policy to go down
where we would be binding future legislators for the next 20 years to pay this debt. Please vote no.
Further discussion, the member from Wabasha, Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, members, you know, I heard the argument that we're going to be binding future legislatures. Members, just having the bonding bill is bonding future taxpayers in Minnesota. We are doing that with the bill to begin with, members. What we're talking about is how we're going to pay off this debt. And to suggest that an ad hoc activity like every single component of this bonding bill violates the Constitution is not believable. Members, I appreciate your support for the amendment.
Further discussion. Seeing no further discussion, roll call being requested, the clerk will take the roll on the amendment. Clerk will close the roll. There being 37 ayes and 92 nays, the amendment is not adopted. Call the member from Ramsey, Representative Hausman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. My apologies for a very last-minute amendment. I was just contacted by the University of Minnesota, and on line 228 on the issue of the Old Main Steam Plant, language needs to be so precise, and we had pre-design and design in it, but they have asked us to add on line 228 to pre-design and design and initiate infrastructure improvements for the renovation of the Old Main Steam Plant. There are 7 copies at the desk, but they have not been copied, and oh, maybe they are out now. But members, this is a sort of a last-minute request as the University of Minnesota read the language, and for best use, we are obviously underfunding that project, and but it does help them make maximum use of the money in the bill. So to pre-design and design and initiate infrastructure improvements for the Old Main Steam Plant. Thank you, members.
Members, again, we will make sure that each member has a copy of the amendment. The Chief Clerk will report the amendment.
Hausman moving to amend House File 1752 as amended as follows. The amendment is coded 599.
Discussion. The member from Cass, Representative Howes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would agree with Representative Hausman. The great wordsmiths at the University of Minnesota said we need to change the language slightly. That's being done once we get the amendment. I'd appreciate a green vote.
The member from Scott, Representative Biskins.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm glad to hear the University of Minnesota has had time to read the bill and pointed this out. I have also, and that's why I'll be voting no on the bill, but I hope the rest of the members have put their time since this bill was slapped on our desk, this Toledo amendment, have taken the time to read it as well.
Further discussion. All those in favor of the Hausman amendment signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The amendment is adopted. Seeing no further amendments at the desk, the clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 1752 as amended.
Third reading. Discussion. The member from Scott, Representative Biskins.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. You know, I hope you take the time to think about what we're doing right now. All right? You know, almost a year and a half ago, there was a big turnover in the legislature. We have a huge class of freshmen that came in, and they ran on two main themes. One of them was the amount of spending in government, and the second was the amount of debt in government. Members, this body in July of 2011 passed debt onto the taxpayers of Minnesota to the tune of $551 million. Well, I know some of it's general obligations, some of it is user finance, but it's debt. Members, just a week or so ago, we also added to the students at the university system another $105 million in debt. Oh yeah, I know that was revenue bonds, but it was debt, and it's debt that's going to have to be paid back out of their pockets. We come here now with another bill that adds another $597 million in debt on the backs of our taxpayers. This biennium, the biennium debt package, and then especially when you add another $400 million, which is going to be coming later on today, will be the largest biennial borrowing package in state history. The largest biennial debt package in state history. And this, after an election where the people overwhelmingly said, cut the size, cut the cost, and cut the debt that government is placing on the backs of the people. Now, I know some folks will say we need to do this because it's jobs. Members, I've been harping since the beginning of session. According to nonpartisan MMB, at that point in the November forecast, we had $2.1 billion of authorized but unissued debt on the backs of the people of the state of Minnesota. If it were truly about jobs, that debt would have been authorized. I found out just the other day, thank you to the great work of NPR, taxpayer-funded NPR, that debt load is still over $1 billion of authorized and unissued debt. If this were about jobs, that debt would have been authorized, would have been issued. We also found out at that time that if you make the case that we need infrastructure, that a huge chunk of that over $1 billion of debt is actually being held by the Department of Transportation, our core infrastructure unit. So it can't be about jobs, it can't be about infrastructure. It's all about debt. And we have to think about that. The largest biennial borrowing package in state history. We are foisting upon the taxpayers of the state of Minnesota after an election cycle in which they overwhelmingly said, cut the spending, cut the debt. And yet we, especially we who have Republican majorities in the House and Senate, are about to foist this onto the backs of the taxpayers. It's not necessary. It's not necessary. We have the debt already authorized if we need the jobs. Let's get it authorized. Let's put this off for another day. The projects in here can wait. But the debt we're foisting upon the backs of Minnesotans is crushing. And it needs to stop. Let's stop it right here, right now. Please vote no.
Member from Dakota, Representative Garofalo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the gentleman from Scott yield for a question?
He will yield. Representative Garofalo.
To my friend from Scott, you said multiple times this is the largest bonding package, biennial bonding package in our state's history. Can you refresh my recollection? In 2005 and 2006, we authorized close to $2 billion in bonding. Can you tell me, is our package larger or smaller than that?
The member from Scott, Representative Biskins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I don't think I need to answer rhetorical questions.
Member from Dakota, Representative Garofalo.
Will the gentleman from Scott yield for another question?
He will not. The member from Dakota, Representative Garofalo.
The gentleman will not yield because he was wrong. He was wrong. The fact of the matter is that this is not the largest biennial bonding package in our state's history. It is factually inaccurate. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Discussion. The member from Hennepin, Representative Carlson.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, members, the comment that was just made about what is authorized and has not been yet issued, I think we have to clarify a couple of things about that. We issue the bonds based on the need for cash flow. So when you have a large project, you issue part of the bonding authority to complete a certain phase of the construction, and then they have another bond sale and issue additional bonds. So it's a little bit misleading when you talk about what's authorized and not used. It's in the pipeline. Yes, there are going to be biennium some cancellations for a variety of reasons. That sometimes comes about as well. But if we issued all of the bonds that were needed for a project all at once, especially a large one, you'd be incurring all kinds of unnecessary interest while you were waiting to make the payments for that project. So I just felt I had to respond to those earlier comments. Members, you know, I'm in the category of people that serve on the committee with the chair, and from the get-go I was advocating for a larger bonding bill than what we have before us. One of the questions that I had to answer for myself was, well, do I vote against a bill because there are things that I felt strongly should be in there, or do I vote for the bill recognizing that we do have to move forward? And I made the decision some time ago to vote for the bill, and I would recommend others vote for the bill as well. And some of the issues that are missing, hopefully, even though we usually bond every other year, we can take up next January when we reconvene. Because there are a number of projects here that could create additional jobs, and I think we can say that we have a high degree of interest in this body in terms of creating jobs for needed projects, not make work. And I view virtually everything in the bill and things that would be potentially before us that were left out as in that category of creating jobs. So I would encourage support.
Member from Clay, Representative Marquardt.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker and members. And I would like to comment on the $30 million for the flood hazard mitigation. Those dollars, that $30 million, will go a long way in completing projects around the state and up and down the Red River Valley in protecting our cities and communities to a 100-year flood. And, you know, since 1997, there has been a lot of investment put into the Red River Valley, and I just want, on behalf of our residents in the Red River Valley, to thank all of those who have helped provide those dollars. Representative Howes, thank you. Representative Hausman, years past, thank you so much. Senator Langseth, former Governor Plenty, and now Governor Mark Dayton, who has valued the investment and helped our communities. And our communities up and down the Red River Valley, be it Breckenridge or Moorhead or Oakport Township or Georgetown, have done a great job in using those dollars and helping to protect those cities. And, you know, we've talked about how much each dollar saves in flood protection. And this spring, the Office of Legislative Auditor sent out a report this year on disasters. And when you look at the data, in 1997, the federal and state funding for disaster with just the floods, the spending was $302 million. And last year in 2011, where the level was almost identical, the crest on the Red River Valley, 38.8 feet, the fourth highest, almost identical. Instead of $302 million being spent, it was $14 million spent in state and local funding. And if you look at the state share, in 1997, it was $90 million spent on those flood repairs. In 2011, again, almost identical river levels, it was $5 million. So not only do these dollars save state and federal dollars many times over, but it helps protect people and properties in these flood-prone areas. So those are dollars well spent. Thank you to Representative Howes and Representative Hausman for working on that this year. And members, please vote yes on this bill.
Member from Hennepin, Representative McGuinness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Marquardt just talked about things that are done in the bill, and I want to talk about some of the things that were left undone. And the first thing I think we need to talk about is what happened to all of our worry and discussion about the carp that are coming up the Mississippi River. We had 4 things we needed to do for protecting our waters from carp this year. One of them was to do some research and figure out where the vulnerabilities of these carp are, what the vulnerabilities are, so we could maybe interfere with their reproduction or something good like that. But what happened is we got about half the money that at $2.6 million for research, when the total cost of the research project was $15 million. So even at the modest proposal that went out of the House, it was basically cut in half. So the university is going to have a choice of doing half as much on carp and half as much on zebra mussels, or ignoring one or the other. And that was only at our modest first attempt. So we didn't do much there. We didn't do much about the carp that are potentially can come in from the Dakotas as we import minnows. We had a weak provision to protect our state. We have got enough money in the legacy bill to set up barriers in between us and Iowa. That's a good thing. That's in the legacy bill. But there's very little money left then in the legacy bill for a barrier on the Mississippi. And that, Governor Dayton had about $12 million in a proposed bonding bill that could have been used for that. So we're saying, no, we're going to give the carp another year to come up the Mississippi before we're going to get serious. That's one thing that was left undone. The second thing that concerns me is the money for parks and trails. We have a huge deficit there. When I look at the parks and trails money, and just if we were going to use it all for trails, and if we stayed on the same trajectory we're on, we would not complete our trail system in the lifetime of my grandchildren. We would, if we used all the money for trails, so Representative Ward, as he's concerned about the trail in his area, that isn't even in the current trail plan. We've done about half of the trail plan that we have in the state. So let's not go out and tell Minnesotans that we are getting ready for the future, because we are not. And the third place where we're not getting ready for the future is in the Southwest Corridor. That is the future. We cannot move enough people into and out of the cities to support our business community. Our business community has been wonderful in its support of the Southwest Corridor, but it was left undone. This is a very modest bonding bill. What's troubling is it doesn't prepare us for the future.
Member from Washington, Representative Detmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Howe, thank you for bringing this bill forward. And I too would like to just mention some things that are not part of this bill, and that is the Minnesota Department of Veterans Affairs, the Veterans Home in Minneapolis. I was there this past weekend, and every year they put on a fisher opener for the veterans, where they actually set up a big pond and they bring trout in. And I got to spend some time with these veterans, many of them World War II veterans, as they had their fishing opener right there at the home. But again, members, the priority one for Veterans Affairs, Minnesota Department of Veterans Affairs, was Building 17 South, 100-bed skilled facility. It was a $25.42 million project, and with the federal government then would kick in $17 million. So basically for $8 million we could complete this project. I would be hopeful that with the next session that we could take a serious look at this project for our veterans and also the project up in Bemidji. Thank you.
The member from Ramsey, Representative Hausman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. A bonding bill is always a complicated thing, and in this case, often the smaller it is, the more things are not on the page, and it is worth spending at least a little bit talking about some of those, because I think we've had a lot of rhetoric this legislative session about being a business-friendly state. In this case, we must have confused the business community very much, because chambers around the state have been actively engaged in projects for this bill. But none of those that have been most actively supported are in this bill. And so despite the fact that chambers, business communities in Rochester, in Mankato, in St. Cloud, in St. Paul, in Minneapolis, Twin West, I think even Edina and Eden Prairie, I'm not sure. I know there are several, yes, Edina and Eden Prairie. All across this region, the business community engaged on this bill. And they made the economic arguments. They were compelling. They compared us to cities across the nation. And unfortunately, as nearly as I've been able to tell, we have given them exactly zero for all that work. And so that, I think, is very regrettable. And I think we missed an opportunity to build strong regional centers in partnership with those cities. Also, in a bonding bill, we usually bend over backwards to look at the lines and say, where can we maximize federal money and where can we maximize private money? Representative Carlson already referenced that in relation to at least one of the projects. And there I can think of maybe half a dozen where we have simply missed the opportunity, either by not funding or underfunding projects. I think particularly in the context of the bill we'll have later today, the stadium bill, it pains me more than ever that in this case we have not funded or underfunded so much that adds to the economic health of the state. But we do need to acknowledge what was able to be included in the bill. We are starting to build the security hospital in St. Peter. And we've had representatives from that area give us, Representative Morrow and others, give us strong reasons why that is an urgent thing. And so we are grateful for that. We are starting we are starting to respond to the encouragement of Representative Erdahl and Howes and others on the Capitol building. Not as aggressive as we might have hoped, but it is there. We expect great things from the research coming out of the Hormel Institute in Austin. It is a great bill for higher education. And that always is, I think, a high priority as we train the workforce of the future. Regrettably, again, the STEM classrooms perhaps are going to be cut, and we are looking forward to the opportunity to correct that. Housing advocates, I have to say, as almost no other group, they have been here. Housing advocates have been here every single day. Talking to everyone, they have had enormous impact on the body here. And the bill reflects some of that. In the special session, we missed that sector, and so we needed to respond to that. And so for those people who have been here, thank you for your work. Also, I think it's important to acknowledge that the author has been flexible beyond belief today and other days in very quickly being willing to respond as we look at some of the language. And so to the author for what is included in this bill, for the language corrections that needed to be done, thank you for your work, and the people of Minnesota, I think, will be grateful as well, and to all the staff who have been part of this. So members, I am voting yes. I would encourage a green vote on what is an important bill for the state of Minnesota.
Member from Mauer, Representative Poppe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. The City of Austin is home to the University of Minnesota Research Center known as the Hormel Institute. I distributed a sheet of paper that talks about the Institute and talks about the International Center of Research Technology. This project is to build a $27 million international center with half of the funding coming from the state of Minnesota. The collaborative partners with the Hormel Institute and the City of Austin include the University of Minnesota, IBM, University of Minnesota Rochester, and Mayo Clinic. This particular project is expected to add 120 strong paying jobs. It's important to note that Representative Howes recognized the significance of this project early on and fervently supported its inclusion in the Capital Infrastructure Bill. The International Center of Research and Technology at the Hormel Institute is very important, not only to the City of Austin, but also to southern Minnesota and certainly to the entire state. It creates jobs, but more importantly, since this cancer prevention and research is the scientists' focus, we all win with this project. Thank you.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Simon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I want to thank Representative Howes and others for putting together the best bill under the circumstance. A few days ago, I was tempted to vote no because something very important to me was not in the bill. I am going to vote yes, reluctantly, because I think there's a major omission in the bill. Others have spoken to it, but I really feel I have to say just a bit more, and that is the Southwest Corridor. And I understand that there is skepticism in certain parts of this chamber about additional rail transit. I get it. But I think in terms of the long-term viability of our region, it's something we really have to open our minds to increasingly. As Representative Hausman said, this is arguably the biggest public works program in the western suburbs right now. It's got the support of the Minneapolis, St. Paul, Twin West, Eden Prairie, and Edina Chambers of Commerce. Strong, strong business backing, and for a reason. It's not just out of some sentimental attachment. It's not because it would be a cool thing to have or because other cities are doing it so we feel we have to. This isn't a case of rail envy. This is a case of sound public policy and what's good for job creators and job doers in our area. Keep in mind, we're estimating that there will be 60,000 more jobs along the Southwest Corridor in the next decade or so. 60,000 more than we have now, and those people have to get to work somehow. And I don't think we can just continue to pave our way out of the problem. I'm all for widening 494 and Highway 100 and Highway 169. This isn't an either or. We should do that too. But that alone isn't going to do it. And I think we're increasingly going to find that it isn't going to do it, and we're going to wish we did projects like Southwest Corridor a whole lot
earlier. For those who don't know, we're on a really exclusive list for the Southwest Corridor. There's something in the federal government called the New Starts projects. New Starts. It's a competitive, highly competitive process. Over 100 different cities and different projects competed for the right to be on this New Starts list. We are one of 12 in the country at a time of great scarcity that made that list. And again, it's not out of some sentimental attachment. It's not because someone thought it would be cool. It's because it met the very strict criteria for ridership, for efficiency, for need, for cost effectiveness. And I would hate to see us lose that 9-to-1 funding ratio. For every dollar we put into Southwest Corridor, we unlock $9 elsewhere. And the other thing I want to say is this. I've heard talk in this chamber or in the back rooms before about federal spending, and that maybe we don't want to encourage federal spending in an area like this at a time of scarcity. Well, the problem with that argument is this money has already been authorized by the federal government, meaning if it doesn't go to the Southwest Corridor, it's not going to not be spent. It will just be spent elsewhere. It'll go to Boston, it'll go to Cleveland, it'll go to Los Angeles, it'll go to New York. This is money that has already been authorized. So it's not as if we're striking a blow for federal deficit reduction if we say no to these federal funds. We're not. That money will go elsewhere. The question is, do we want it to go to our metropolitan region, or do we want it to go to someone else's? And I'm hoping in future years, I know the die is cast today, but I'm hoping in future years that more and more members here who will be back next year will open your minds to the possibilities and to the real wisdom of this project. It's 3,500 construction jobs. Governor Pawlenty supported it in 2009. I sent a lot of you, I think everyone, an email last week when we were debating another bill talking about the irony that Governor Pawlenty's presidential campaign in part chose the site for their headquarters in downtown Minneapolis because explicitly it was on a light rail line. So the governor and his folks realized the wisdom of a strong and mature transit system that includes rail, not to the exclusion of other things, not to the exclusion of widening 494 and other highways, but in addition to and as a complement to that. And so I think we have a decision to make, and some would argue that the next bill we're going to take up has the same decision in mind, which is what kind of a metro area do we want to be like? And I did a quick little Google search about comparably sized cities or metro areas. And think to yourself in your mind's eye what you think the Twin Cities is in terms of its peers around the country. What is it, or what would you like it to be? Is it Tulsa, Mesa, Arizona, Wichita, Kansas? Believe it or not, all comparably sized. We don't think of it that way. I think we think of ourselves, frankly, little Minnesota superiority complex. We think of ourselves as a cut above those metro areas. No disrespect to the good folks who live there, but we do. We don't think of those as our peer cities. What we do think of as our peer cities are cities like Seattle, Chicago, and Denver, with mature, strong, business-supported, employer-friendly, and employee-friendly transit services. And that's what we want here. One other point. I hear from time to time the efficiency argument, the idea that somehow we shouldn't build rail because what comes in the fare box doesn't cover the operating costs. And as I said in another bill a week or two ago that we debated, that's kind of a false construct in my mind because we don't apply the same standard to highways. So Highway 94 takes in zero in the fare box and costs millions to run and maintain and preserve, but no one says that Highway 94 loses money every year. No one would think to argue it in those terms because we just don't think about it. There is no fare box, so we don't think in terms of profit and loss. And I would just warn, just for the future, I would warn rural members in particular to be careful of that line of argument. Representative Fabian, for example, I'm sure that you want to preserve air service in Thief River Falls. Is it efficient? Are all the costs covered? No, but there's a public good involved, and we don't think of it in terms of public profit or private profit for that matter. Others of you in rural communities that have roads that are expensive to build, where maybe a few hundred people a day will drive on them, versus in my district, if you built a mile of road, tens of thousands would ride on it a day. Someone using that efficiency argument is going to come to you one day and say, we ought to just build all the roads in the metro area because it's a bigger bang for the buck. It's more efficient. There's a bigger return on public investment in terms of operating costs. If you widen Highway 100 in my district, 30 or 40,000 people will use it a day. If you widen, say, Highway 14 or an even smaller road in rural Minnesota, it's going to be far less. So if you just look at the spreadsheet and apply the data in a kind of a blind, soulless way, that would dictate against building those projects. So I just caution folks in the future, next year, the year after, and the year after that,
beware the argument that we shouldn't build something because it isn't efficient in the terms that we normally think about it. So this is a plea not so much for today. I'm going to vote for the bill, and I thank Representative Howes. We had some good offline discussions about this. I just ask you in the future, as our roads get more congested, and as we're staring at the fact that $1 of state money unlocks $9 elsewhere, that people in this body can give a chance and keep an open mind with respect to Southwest Corridor. Thanks.
The member from Norman, Representative Eakin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. And I rise in support of the bill. And one of the main reasons why is because of the funding that's provided for flood mitigation, a very important issue in the area that I represent on the Red River. Representative Marquardt had already talked about and presented some of the hard numbers of savings in the area due to the investments that have been made previously in flood mitigation. And it's been estimated that for every dollar that's invested in flood mitigation, we save about $7. And I believe that that's actually a very conservative estimate. I think that the actual number is higher than that. The hard numbers that Representative Marquardt referred to, I think, is an indication of that. I think it's also important to point out some of the psychological benefits of this investment as well, because there is a lot of stress associated with the floods and the threat of floods. And the money that's going into ring dikes and to protections for our communities and for our businesses and for our farms in that area goes a long way to bringing a peace of mind to those communities and those community members. And I've seen it. I've seen the stress that many of these families are under. And it does take more than just a psychological toll. I mean, there's obviously counseling that's involved for many of these people. So there is a real monetary savings as well as a psychological impact here that is being addressed. So I would ask for a green vote again. I believe it's a good time to do it, especially with the low interest rates, getting a bigger bang for the buck. People need work. These projects are ready to hit the ground running. So again, I appreciate a green vote. Thanks.
The member from Dakota, Representative Wardlow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, listening to the debate here, it's interesting to note how many different projects are included in this bonding bill of such a diverse in type and kind and size. The process is somewhat befuddling insofar as I don't understand, and I don't think there's any good reason or explanation why projects of a certain type and kind shouldn't be separate and heard by and through the committees that would have jurisdiction over those kinds of projects. Transportation, and so light rail could be something that would be discussed. Bonding for light rail might be discussed in the Transportation Committee instead of just shoehorned into the bonding bill here. And you can go down the list. It's a bizarre process we have here, but we end up with a situation where a lot of members feel like they need to vote for a very, very large bill that borrows nearly $1 billion and has very high interest costs going forward and transfers money and taxes from future generations to pay for current creates current obligations and transfers money from future generations to pay for those obligations. Members feel compelled in certain instances to vote for this the entirety of this very large, overlarge, I would say, bill because one project in it looks good to them. And certainly there are projects in here that are praiseworthy: flood mitigation, capital restoration. I wish we had an opportunity to vote on each one of these things individually. But the first rule of lawmaking, I think, as in medicine, should be do no harm. So if there is one thing in this bonding bill that causes us to scratch our heads, that detracts from the welfare of our state or disrupts our Constitution, then we should not pass this bill. We should vote no. And it's unfortunate that that's the case, but that's the result of a process that's broken, a process that puts all these things together and then asks us to make a collective judgment across all of these different things in different categories. That process needs to be reformed, but it can't be reformed today. The one thing in this bill, there are several problems with the bill, but the one thing in the bill that is, I think, fatal to the bill, or should be fatal to the bill, is the, one second here, Business Development through Capital Projects Grant Program. Members, if you look at page 37 of the bill, section 32. This section of the bill gives $50 million, I believe, or there's an appropriation earlier in the bill, but this program is $50 million handed over to the Commissioner of the Department of Employment and Economic Development to give out grants for publicly financed projects, eligible projects being any project for which general obligation bonds of the state may be issued. So that means that the Commissioner of the Department of Employment and Economic Development may, under this bill, should it pass and be signed into law, create grants for public purposes, any public purpose, for which we, the legislature, could bond. There's a doctrine in constitutional law that is often forgotten called non-delegation. Members, non-delegation is a very important doctrine. I'll just give a very quick explanation of it. Under the doctrine of non-delegation, the legislature cannot give to another branch of government, in this case the executive branch, the Commissioner of the Department of Employment and Economic Development, we cannot give the Commissioner legislative power. But that's exactly what we're doing. We're giving the Commissioner the power to make grants using borrowed money for any purpose for which we could bond. That's basically transferring, within the limit of the $50 million appropriation, our power as legislators to review laws that authorize borrowing, which require a 3/5 majority vote, and giving that power to the Commissioner of Employment and Economic Development. Now, think about it this way. Would it be constitutional, permissible, or even a good idea to take this entire bill and turn it into a series of suggestions and then hand over all nearly $1 billion of bonding authority to the Commissioner of some department and administrative branch? Would that be constitutional? Would that be wise? No. But there's no distinction with the difference between that and doing the same thing with a $50 million borrowing amount. So members, if you believe in the separation of powers, if you think that the legislature should create laws, if you think that the legislature should have the authority to look at individual projects and bond for them, and you think the administrative department, the executive branch, is meant to execute the laws that the legislature passes, if you think these are important bulwarks against encroachments on our liberties, then members, I think you need to vote no on this bonding bill.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Hornstein.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I appreciate the hard work that Representative House, Chair House did on this, and I'm very pleased that there's money for housing and metro parks, the Minneapolis Interchange, Minneapolis Community and Technical College. But I just very briefly wanted to echo Representative Simon's words. He really said everything that I feel about the real glaring omission of the Southwest Corridor. Every point he made is very well taken. Just wanted to add one thing, and that's to quote from a wonderful editorial. I have copies of it here if you want to see it, from the Pioneer Press, written by the various chambers of commerce that Representative Simon cited. And what these chambers emphasize, and I think it's absolutely very critical, Representative Simon mentioned this, is that for every state dollar we're putting in to the Southwest Corridor, we get 9 other dollars in return. That's an incredible, efficient ratio of state resources and what they can leverage. And so the Chamber's right in this editorial from Friday the 27th in the Pioneer Press. A state investment in Southwest LRT does exactly what bonding projects are supposed to do. Contribute to the wealth and welfare of the whole state, leverage other dollars, and do so in a way supported by citizens and businesses of all political stripes. And that's why this project needed to be included. We're going to continue to fight very hard for it. But while I'm going to vote for this bill today, I do think it's a glaring omission that we don't have money for the Southwest Corridor.
The member from Olmsted, Representative Norton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Howes, I know it's very difficult to put together a bonding bill that can gain the amount of votes it needs. I do want to thank you for your effort. In particular, I want to mention a couple projects. Representative Quam and Senator Senjum have been working on the Zumbro Valley dredging for some time. I appreciate you putting that project in there for them and for the rest of us who support the southern part of the state. I also want to thank you for the workforce co-location provision. That too has been worked on for many years, and I'm glad that's in there. And certainly I want to mention in southern Minnesota, we're very pleased, as Representative Poppe mentioned, for your inclusion of the Hormel Institute and the funding for that cancer research. It's very important for health care and for Minnesota remaining high on the healthcare states, list of healthcare states. So I want to thank you for that. I do want to mention, however, there are some things missing, and Representative Hausman mentioned those. Some of those are the huge economic benefit that would have been gained from 3 of the major regional centers with the Civic Center and Convention Center inclusions of those particular projects, and you did not put those in the bill. I just want everyone in this body to be aware that our Rochester Area Chamber of Commerce, our City Council, our county board members, everyone in the community that has been working on that particular project for the last, well, probably 4 or 5 years now, how much concern we have that this is not being included. We have been lobbied very heavily by our Convention and Visitors Bureau, certainly, and the Chamber, but also from folks like our hotel and motel industries and our restaurants and other businesses. The reason this is so important to a community like Rochester is that we have a large number of hotels, motels, and businesses that cater to the many, many hundreds of thousands of patients that come through to Mayo Clinic, but they're not there on the weekends. And those hotels and those businesses have plenty of capacity to serve, but they aren't the people from out of state and out of the city coming in to Rochester, as there could be if we address this issue of our convention and visitors, or convention center and civic center. So, members, I just want to say that is a glaring absence from this bill. I know Mankato and St. Cloud have similar concerns. I do think a small window has been opened with the money in the deed grant program, but certainly it's not enough to deal with the many requests that I know will be flooding to that office, as will, I'm sure, this particular request for the Mayo Civic and Convention Center. So, again, I will be supporting this because of what good it will do for construction and jobs. And jobs was the reason we came here this year. I'm glad to see we finally are getting to vote on this jobs bill. I'm very pleased that we're addressing some of those needs, but certainly not all of them. Thank you, members.
The member from Scott, Representative Biskins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. The member from Farmington, corrected me on the size of bonding bills, and I'm going to have to say that, technically he was right, but I also need to add, members, the year he points out is the year the legislature also enacted $1.8 billion in new trunk highway funds due to a gas tax increase of a Governor Palante's veto and subsequent legislative override. So yes, 2008 was a larger bonding bill, but $1.8 billion of that bonding bill was earmarked due to a gas tax increase. So let's make sure we've got all of the cards out on the table.
Member from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I rise in support of the bill. I do want to point out a couple things. I appreciate Representative Eakin and Representative Marquardt talking about flood damage mitigation, but in past bonding bills we have had some balance between cleanup and prevention, and this bill does not have that. There's only $6 million for Reinvest in Minnesota wetland restoration programs. Prevention is cheaper than cleanup, and when we are having miles and miles and miles of drain tile laid per year, there's a consequence. When we pass legislation that facilitates more drainage, there's a consequence. So we're put in the position of having to build the dikes higher, buy out the houses in the floodplain, and do a number of the things that flood damage mitigation does. But there is another way, and that is to try to prevent these problems from occurring, restoring the wetlands, keeping the wetlands that are there, preventing them from being drained, and making sure that we're reducing the flood impacts in the future. So this is not the year that we're going to be doing what we could do. At some point, we are going to have to address the question of drainage, both in the urban, suburban, and rural areas. At some point, we're going to have to look at trying to retain wetlands, restore wetlands, rather than building the dikes higher and higher and higher. So this year we have flood damage mitigation, and we have some money for prevention. I know Representative Howes has tried to get more. Someday, folks, we will have to do this. We have to start.
Further discussion to the bill. Member from Blue Earth, Representative Breinert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I'll echo some of the comments that have been made by others. Many of us have spent a good part of this session speaking aggressively on behalf of the needs of our communities. But I won't start there in relation to this bill. I'd like to back up a little and think about the general role of regional economies in bonding. And I really feel like there's a discussion we haven't had this session. There's been, and some of my colleagues would say, well, I never have anything in the bonding bill. And others would say, it's not about local projects. We should only be doing state infrastructure. Well, I think that's where the heart of the question lies, is what is state infrastructure and what role do regional economies play in the health of the state? And I really feel that that question needs to be revisited. Clearly that is not going to happen before this vote is taken today. But I think we cannot, as a state, move forward without recognizing that each of our regional economies is a significant contributor to the well-being of the whole, and that that is part of the balance that occurs in a bonding process, creating a fair and balanced bill. With that said, I would say that until last Thursday, Southwest Minnesota felt pretty absent from this bonding bill. But the spreadsheet that did come out last week has addressed some of the issues that our region and communities have found very pressing. First of all, as already mentioned, the St. Peter Regional Treatment Center at least is addressed in its planning phase. And I think, as Representative Morrow has made clear on a number of occasions, that project is truly a state project, and we all ought to hold it in a very high place in terms of not only planning for it, but the building money ought to follow close behind. But I'm glad to at least see that planning money there. The second significant project, Mankato's a major MNSCU institution. Minnesota State Mankato has had a bonding proposal on the table of great significance, and that's the clinical science building, and it at least is moving forward again with the planning money, and that is a jobs bill. It will have significant impact in the medical arena and affect a wide range of both opportunity for jobs and service for underserved members of our community. So, and the third area is there's some transit money, outstate transit money, that will help Mankato complete its multimodal transit center. So those are important, and those are enough reason for me to support this bill today. But as Representative Norton indicated, there's a major hole in this bill for the Mankato area, and that is the failure to address the project that has been identified as the #1 project for our region for the last 3 years. And we've been to the legislature since 2007 on behalf of that project, and that's our event center hockey arena expansion. Now, there are those who have offhandedly dismissed event centers, civic centers, hockey arenas as simply local projects. But 80% of our business community, 80% of the membership of our chamber and economic development organization has identified this project as the #1 goal of our region in terms of economic development. And I think to ignore that, both that voice of support and the thousands of hours and hundreds of members of our community that have gotten behind that is a failure to recognize both the commitment of the community and, as I said earlier, the role this community plays in the economic well-being of the state. So I hope that we will revisit this discussion in the next session about the appropriate role of regional centers in the bonding process and in the economic well-being of the state. Thank you, members.
Further discussion. The member from Cass, the author of the bill, Representative Howes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, members, for, I'm not sure how long it took, but for putting up with all the amendments, the discussion. I think really everything has been said. It has been difficult, but it's been interesting, and it's been a pleasure to make it actually work. I know some people think you can do this in a 100-yard dash, but it really is a marathon. There are days when I actually have felt like a ping pong ball, back and forth, when one side changes their mind, the other side, and I'm back and forth. But now that we're this close to vote, I would appreciate a green vote, and right now I feel more like the pregame show of Monday Night Football.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. Clerk will close the roll. There being 99 ayes and 32 nays, the bill is passed as amended. Its title is agreed to. Next bill on the fiscal calendar for today is Senate File 1983. The clerk will report the bill.
Senate File 1983 on the fiscal calendar for today, the second engrossment, an act relating to appropriations.
Call on the member from Itasca, Representative McElfatrick, to present your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I am glad to bring this bill before the body today. Every time there's a construction permit pulled in the state, there is a surcharge that is attached to that bill. That money goes into the Construction Code Fund, which is administered by the Department of Labor. The money is used for inspections, and it's also used to support enforcement of code violations. For 4 years now, according to statute, we have been transferring $1.5 million per year from the fund to help balance the state's budget. That has produced some problems. It's difficult to get inspections done in a timely manner. There is sometimes a potential delay in issuing licenses, and all of this can contribute to delayed construction projects. The department has tried to compensate for the loss of that money each year by increasing the surcharge on the permits that are pulled, and at a point they considered inspecting only 1 out of every 10 construction projects. However, there was enough refusal with that with the contractor groups and the IBEW that plan was kind of let go. This bill would remove the statutory requirement for the transfer of those funds. It would again reduce the surcharge on the permits that's being charged right now, and it would not take effect until 2015. The bill is supported by a number of organizations, including the Minnesota Electrical Association, the National Electrical Association, the IBEW, Minnesota Security and Technology Association, Contract Electrical Inspectors Association, Builders Association of Minnesota, and the Minnesota Low Voltage Association. To my knowledge, there are no opponents to the bill, so I would ask for your support. Thank you.
The member from Washington, Representative Detmer, for what purpose do you rise?
Mr. Speaker, point of personal privilege.
State your point of personal privilege.
Mr. Speaker and members, I'd like to have your attention, please. I think we all know what's in Canton, Ohio. That's the National Football Hall of Fame. We all know what's in Coopertown, Ohio, which is the Baseball Hall of Fame. I think we know what's in Eveleth, Minnesota, which is the Hockey Hall of Fame. But you probably don't know what's in Stillwater, Oklahoma. In Stillwater, Oklahoma is the National Wrestling Hall of Fame. And there we induct every year from Minnesota, we induct coaches, Olympic athletes, wrestlers, NCAA champions. We induct outstanding Americans, several presidents who have wrestled in collegiate or in high school, even Hollywood actors who have participated in high school or collegiate wrestling. We also award what we call the Medal of Courage. The Medal of Courage is awarded to wrestlers who have overcome great challenges to be able to participate in the sport of wrestling. And members, Mr. Speaker, we have one of our own right here in the House chamber that was recently inducted into the National Wrestling Hall of Fame under the Medal of Courage. And last Saturday, this past Saturday, down in Austin, Minnesota. And I'd like to introduce to you the most recent induction into the National Wrestling Hall of Fame, Representative Tori Westrom.
Thank you, Representative Detmer. There is an amendment that asks the clerk to report the amendment. Member from St. Louis, Representative Rukavina.
Well, Mr. Speaker, Representative Detmer, you're not going to let that get by without us hearing a few words from our honorable state representative over there. I mean, I think I could out-wrestle him right now because I don't know if he could get a hand on me or not. But Representative Westrom, aren't you going to say a few words for us? Come on.
The member from Grant, Representative Westrom. For what purpose do you rise?
Mr. Speaker, point of personal privilege.
State your point of personal privilege.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Rukavina, good job. You always know how to get the best of me, don't you? But Mr. Speaker, Representative Detmer, many people don't know what everybody does outside of this chamber, and so a year and a half ago when I was nominated for the Wrestlers Hall of Fame, I thought, how do I fit this bill? But members, Representative Detmer and other coaches across this state put a lot of time and dedication into nominating and selecting nominees for the National Wrestling Hall of Fame. And so it's been a great honor, great experience, and quite humbling to be chosen as one of the nominees this past weekend in Representative Poppy's district down in Austin, Minnesota. And so, Mr. Speaker, members, Representative Detmer, I'm truly humbled by that honor that was bestowed upon myself and 6 others this past weekend.
Thank you, Representative Rukavina. There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Holberg and others moving to amend Senate File 1983. The second engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded 579.
Call the member from Dakota, Representative Holberg, to your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This amendment, the 579 amendment, deals with the fire safety account, and the House position was a little more generous to the firefighters, but we needed to work with the Senate, and so the language here is an agreed upon resolution. The tax rate will go down for the insurance payers, and the money will be distributed between the Fire Marshal's office and the grant program. This is an agreement that's supported by the Minnesota State Fire Departments Association, Fire Marshals Association, the Professional Firefighters, the Minnesota State Fire Chiefs Association, and the Minnesota Chapter of International Association of Arson Investigators. Members, this particular money, over the years, less than half of the money that was raised under this program actually went to the firefighters and the state fire marshal's office. I think moving forward, those organizations will actually get more money. The taxpayers will get a tax break, and hopefully we won't have those nice firefighters in the red polo shirts coming to visit us in our office mad because there's some proposal to take the surplus in the fund that hasn't been appropriated to them yet. So I would appreciate a green vote on the amendment.
Discussion to the amendment. Discussion. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the Holberg amendment signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. The motion prevails. Seeing no further amendments at the desk, the clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, Senate File 1983, as amended.
Third reading. Discussion. Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. Members, please vote. Clerk will close the roll. There being 131 ayes and 0 nays, the bill is passed as amended. Its title is agreed to.